We're starting now with Professor Ramadan Husein from the University of Tubingen, Germany, who comes from the Institute for Ancient Near Eastern Studies, the Department of Ancient Studies and Art History, and works in Egyptology. His title, the title of his presentation and the topic of his presentation now is Excavating Egypt in the Digital Age, the Saqqara Site Tombs Project. So please, and please see to be like 20, maybe 25 minutes, and then we will ask you no questions.
Okay.
Okay. So
I'll try to
do the microphones, please.
Yeah. Would you allow me to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let me start this slideshow. So, hello everyone. As you heard, my name is Ramadan Husein. I'm from Egypt, but I went to the US to get my PhD, and now I'm working in Germany, but I'm working on this big project. And since time is really tight, I'm not going to give you introduction a lot, but we started this project as a documentation project of some tombs that were discovered in Egypt, in Saqqara, between November 1899 and 1903. So about 116 years later, we came to Saqqara in order to re-excavate these tombs, document them, and apply digital technology in the documentation. But we ended up, the project took a completely different, forked off to a different direction with the documentation as well. And we ended up discovering a very interesting mummification workshop. It is the first that has ever been found in Egypt, with a wealth of material that is connected to rituals, mummification, the business of mummification, and all these things. So make this story very short. One of the things that I've learned, and I keep always in my mind, is when you work in archaeology, keep in mind excavation is a destructive process. When you excavate, you destroy context in order to produce knowledge. But the very fact is you have inflicted damage on the archaeological site. Yes, you cleaned, you do everything. But at the end of the day, the only thing that can remedy the damage that we inflict on the site is the documentation. Recording and documentation as accurate as it could be. So one of the other things that we always think about is when we expose a monument, there is always no amount of conservation or restoration can stop the decay of this monument. At some point, the monument will disintegrate or recycled. And this is a very sad situation. Yes, as archaeologists, we try to excavate things and discover things, but at the end of the day, what we are doing to the monument is we're exposing it to damaging factors. The only thing that can remedy this is documentation and recording, and it has to be as accurate as possible. So recording and documentation in archaeology cannot be overestimated. At some point, that the only way to preserve a monument is by documenting it. You have your facsimile conservation of this monument. And at some point you do conservation by copying this monument using all this digital technology. I had these ideas in mind when I went to Saqqara to re-excavate and document these tombs. So making sure our documentation records would be as close to reality as possible. Then I had to borrow 3D technology, laser scanning and 3D photogrammetry, and combine these approaches together. So to give you an idea where the site we're working, this is Saqqara, this is the step pyramid of King Zoser, and this is the pyramid of King Unas from Dynasty 5 in Egypt. We're talking about sometimes around 2300 BC, this one. And about 660 BC, a group of Egyptian military commanders came around this pyramid and built their tombs around it. We came to document all these tombs that were excavated between November 1899 and 1903. So about 117 years later, we wanted to document these tombs. And they look, every single one is huge shaft, as you could see, sometimes 10 by 10, and it goes 30 meters deep. And you can have side shafts that they go down. And at the end, the bottom, you would see a burial chamber like this, the most important thing about it is this texts on the walls. Those are religious texts, what we call the copies of the permit texts and copies of the coffin texts. Those are religious texts written inside the permits of the kings and also on the coffins of individuals. So when the first round of documentation about these tombs came out exactly in January 1900, so about 120 years ago, this is the first record and the only record that we have for these tombs. And what do they look like? As archaeologists used to do documentation, the idea is when you use a manual documentation using your pencil and paper, what you actually do is you're turning the 3D reality that you have into a 2D perception of what you think the reality looks like. So the traditional documentation is very selective process because it depends on which perspective you want to see, which angle you want to see the monument, and also the quality of it is very conditional on the skills of the archaeologist. If you are good using pencils and pens, and if you're good with the measurements and all these things. So those are the early records of these tombs that we wanted to do. Very straight line, unrealistic lines of the the walls of the shafts, even the top plan of them, and we will see what's going to happen. These tombs were completely backfilled, which means there is so much amounts of debris, sometimes 6-meter high mounds of debris were put on top of it. We wanted to do laser scanning the entire area when we want to do a mapping, which means we want to produce a map that is a digital map. So cleaned this sand, and this is the site. What you see, we're using laser scanning with 3D photography in order to make a survey map of the entire area. Every single yellow triangle right here is a scanning station for us. That means the scanner stood on it. And every single triangle has a coordinate points, which means we're producing geographical positioning of everything using the tripod, the total station, the scanner. And then the scanner, what it does is it records the geometry of the space. It gives you those small point clouds. So you get the geometry of the space, but you don't have the other layer of information that is the color of the space. So what we do is we have a scanning station here, a laser scanner stands here, for example. Once it goes around, and then we picks it up, and then we put a I-star camera that's 360 degrees camera. What it does, it collects the color information of the space. And then we have 2 layers of information on top of one another. When we put all the scans together, it creates the mesh as you see. And this is the results of what you see. This is not a satellite image. This is not an image from space. This is the result of our on-the-ground scanning laser scanner with the I-star camera, that's the 360 degrees. I'm running because I want to go down these shafts, those 3 shafts that 30 meters deep, and we excavated in 1899. So we go down, every single one has this nice burial chamber with the text inside them. We do laser scanning of all of them, but one thing we made about the laser scanning 30 meters deep underground is that we wanted to know the geographical position of every single feature underground, every room, every corridor, their orientation, which means we had to bring down the total station as well. So building 2 grids, 1 grid above ground and a similar grid underground, to know how the walls and the corridors actually bend and turn. Every room can be a standalone scan, and then they can be merged together. The quality of the scans that we have is very precise in terms of resolution, also measurements. The accuracy is by 0.5 millimeter, this is really high precision. And this is one of the burial chambers with one of the shafts that goes down and then a corridor that leads into it. Interesting thing is that when you have a 3D model, that you can manipulate it and you look at it from different perspectives, which gives you a complete different experience. If you are standing there, you have your natural look and angle at it. But once you have a 3D model, you can enjoy the ability to look at it from different perspectives. But what is the important thing is that you can slice through this shaft and have one profile to look at it, and the accuracy of your measurements is by 1,000 point here. And if you don't like this 3D look of it, you can turn into the traditional two-dimensional point by taking this JPEG image and take it all the way to Illustrator, and you have your line drawing in a matter of 1 day. And that saves so much time. You can bring all your scans together, and you have all these chambers and the corridor, the shafts, and you have your idea of an underground landscape 30 meters deep. You could have a connection between the spatial relationship between structures above ground and the other one underground because of your ability to turn and around the model, and you even cut through it and slice it. So the other important thing, this is a photogrammetry. This is an image of one of these burial chambers after conservation, and this is a 3D model of it. You could even read the hieroglyphs from here. But the interesting thing for me was to produce a line drawing of these texts, a facsimile. This is a huge, a very old tradition in Egyptology that you make copies of the text and the scenes on the walls. And it, as a discipline, it had so many steps and evolution. One of them is they were using typeset. This is from January 1900. When they published this text about 120 years ago, they would use the typeset formats. They're bringing all these signs together, they put it together, then they press it, and this is your publication. It was interesting, but it's not the real form of the hieroglyphs. We want to do digital documentation, which means we wanted to have a photogrammetric model of the burial chamber and the text, and this is how we do it. Every blue frame that you see here is showing you the position of the camera. We take a lot of overlapping images. The overlap percentage sometimes is about 45% overlap. Then the computer, the software, the ArcheoSoft, software can take all these frames together and do the overlaps and creates what we know as the mesh, as you could see here. But you could even see the hieroglyphs from this mesh. But this is not a space yet because it can give you a model but no measurements. What we do is every single flag you see here is a control point, which means it's a small sticker with a number on the wall, and we shoot it, we give it, with a total station, we give it a coordinate point. When you take all this data, migrate it into AutoCAD to create the space and the measurements, you feed the program all these coordinates points, and it gives you the exact space, the measurements. So what you end up with a model that is exactly the same as in reality. And then this is the kind of photographs that you have. The high resolution of these photographs. You could take this JPEG image and go to Illustrator and do your tracing and even color. So you can have an idea about color restoration, digital color restoration, and have an idea how it looked like when the Egyptians finished it 2,600 years ago. And this is just a close-up to show you how precise and how high resolution of these images that we're taking. But one important thing for me was, since the hieroglyphs are always on the curved surface, so in any time you try to photograph it, you see distortion. The hieroglyphs would look like this. So one interesting thing I was hoping for is to be able to get this 3D model of the wall and fold it out, make it straight. So we had a nice idea of migrating all our point cloud from the laser scanning and the photogrammetric folders into AutoCAD. And in AutoCAD, you could have this cylindrical tool. You put your wall inside this cylindrical tool, and you'll be able through AutoCAD to fold it out and make it straight. It looks like this during the process of folding it out. And at the end, you've got a wall that is completely straight that also maintains the measurements of this wall. And at the end of the day, you could have your line drawing by doing it on Illustrator like this. So we go back to the big discovery here is that because we're working here, this is the tomb that was discovered in November 1899. The excavator stopped here. And in 2018, we moved only 1 meter to the south of the excavator where he left off, and we discovered this shaft and then discovered this structure, 3 different components of the first ever discovered mummification workshop from Egypt. What we see is this shaft. It goes down 13 meters to this big, huge room. This is the workshop underground with its ventilation system. All these channels up there brings fresh air down. And then you got the bowls and cups that were used in the embalming. An important thing that they had inscriptions of all the names and the substance, oils, resins, other substance of mummification. So we have this gold mine of cups and bowls that we do residue analysis, chemistry into archaeological research in order to know what are the oils and the resins that the Egyptians used for mummification. And one of them, of course, of digital technology. This was huge incense burner. If you're dealing with corpses here, you get this bad smell of the bodies. You need to deodorize the atmosphere down, so you get your huge incense burner. And this is a 3D model, a photogrammetric model of that particular feature underground. So to get a 3D model, laser scan on a photogrammetric model combined together of this shaft going 13 meters deep and end up with a mummification workshop underground, you could use your 3D data. He gave them to a nice graphic company working for National Geographic, and this is what they produced for us. So what will happen is we have really as close as to reality records from laser scan and photogrammetry. This is a photogrammetric model of the other component of the embalming workshop above ground, this rectangular plates. Those are the results of a number of overlapping photographs from the ground, nothing above ground, but you could move the model anyway. Important unit is this shaft, 30 meters deep. We're gonna go down this shaft, and this is a combination also of our laser scanning and photogrammetry data together to give you an idea how features underground relate to features above ground. It gives you a completely different look at archaeology now, because you're not using only 2D drawings for you, but you have 3D drawings that can make you appreciate the actual reality. We're gonna go down this shaft very quickly, 30 meters deep, because here's what we do. We cleaned it up. We did our laser scanning of even the situation of the shaft when we discovered it. And this is one form of the laser scan we have. 6 tombs were cut into this shaft because it was a communal burial place. Everybody embalmed in this mummification workshop will have to buy a lot and a grave in this place because we had interesting things. So this is the new discovery. And those were the tombs that were discovered in 1899. And this is how they relate to the tombs that we discovered in 2018. So interesting thing to show you that we document the situation when how we discovered these underground galleries completely filled with sand. This is the result of a laser scanning round along with iStar camera 360 degrees together. And this is how it looks like. Important thing about this, every single thing you see on the ground is measurable. I can measure on the computer the distance between this pot and this wall, for example, between this pot and this stone, for example, because we use our total station to give us accurate measurements of the entire space. Very quickly, what kind of tombs we have. This is a burial chamber for a woman by the name Tadihur. Here's how we documented it when we entered it. It's a photogrammetric model of the sarcophagus, the huge stone coffin, and the faience Sharabti figurines, and the decayed wooden boxes, one here, a third is here. As I said, this is the situation that the Egyptians left it 2,600 years ago. When we clean up this place, we destroy that particular view and context. How we remedy that is by the accurate documentation of this situation that other people 50 years from now can come and appreciate that particular context and also get able to study it and measure everything. You can have every unit on the ground as a standalone model that is real in terms of measurements and everything else. Even decayed wooden coffins, like the wooden coffin of Tadihor right here, you don't handle it because if you touch it, it turns into brown dust. But we have the ability, we're using photogrammetry to turn this dust, pile of dust that was once a coffin, into a physical reality, but it's a digital form. So you preserve this pile of dust now into a digital format. And this is the genius idea of using 3D documentation, is even organic material that will completely disappear and maintain no shape can maintain that shape in a digital format. And the interesting thing, even text like this text completely destroyed and became just tiny, tiny pieces of plaster, as you see. We could, from the digital 3D, the photogrammetric model, overnight have a line drawing, a colored one, taking this image with the exact measurements in a 3D form, turning into a JPEG, go to Illustrator and produce that overnight. In the morning, you can go quickly and double check. And this is the interesting thing, because this coffin does not exist anymore. It's a pile of dust, but you preserve it in a digital format. If you cross the hallway to this room, that's a very interesting one. This is the situation, a photogrammetric model of these sarcophagus right here and another sarcophagus, two wooden coffins that completely turned into dust, decayed. But this has been, we cleaned it, but we wanted to do something interesting. Photogrammetry and laser scanning during the excavation process, every phase. So phase one, that was the first round of excavations. When we cleaned up a little bit, we do a second round of documentation and then a third round of documentation. So we are moving to an interesting level, which is applying 3D documentation, not just for standing features, but along the process of the cleaning of the excavations. If you go here very quickly, I have an interesting situation of this burial chamber with this huge sarcophagus and then these three mummies on top of it and a fourth right here. This one is very interesting because it has this magnificent object, this one. It's a gilded silver mask, the first to be discovered in Egypt since 1939. Interesting, very rare object. It's the third of its kind. We were very happy. We're not talking about much about it, but this is also a 3D documentation of how the excavation process with tiny objects made of mud, sun-dried mud. This is a small boat, a symbolic boat. It's the boat of the sun god, but it's very tiny. If you look at this model here, you can barely see there is some scratches here, but in the mesh from the photogrammetric model, we could see the hieroglyphs more visible in here. And this is the name of the boat. It's called Mesketet, which is one of two boats for the sun god. And you could see it more clearly here. So even photogrammetric models can give you a chance to see something that you don't see. If we jump to here, and this will be the last one, we have a room filled with 4 decayed wooden coffins, as you see. And this is also a photogrammetric model with all this very interesting canopic jars in the back right here. They're very close to reality. They're measurable and interesting things. When you take your 3D documentation, you could see how the wood decayed. If you touch this, this is gone. But now you have the ability to preserve this wood in a different, in a digital format. When you have all this data given to a graphic company for National Geographic to produce this documentary, you get a fantastic experience of virtual reality and seeing all these things. Good thing about this model is that on the computer, we can go to any corner of this room and zoom in. So you could see things that you don't see in with your naked eye. So as if you're taking the entire room, put it under a microscope that allows you to see features and how things relate to one another. In reality, you're not going to be able to do that. And even human remains can be preserved in a photogrammetric model like this. Like those mummies, they're very decayed, you cannot handle, but you could measure the bones. you can't measure the bones in reality because they're very fragile, but you could really do that. And here comes the last thing for me. We've cleaned all these rooms. They're very pristine, they're nice. But we have the ability now to go back and reverse our process, which means we bring all the laser scanning and the photogrammetric models of every single burial chamber as it was left 2,600 years ago, and reverse this process and make sure, okay, this is how we found Tadihor, this is how we found Didi Busted, this is how we found this burial chamber, this is how we found this, and this is this. Now we are to the point that we can say, sorry for all the destruction we have made to these contexts, but you know what? Digitally, you could live the same experience, and also you could examine it in a way that we can't, or we don't have an idea to do. And then you could really understand this underground landscape and how it works because of all these models. And this is one of my favorite things that I would like to say, to end up with, is that the ability to know the features, the structures above ground and the structures underground, and how they relate to one another. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really, I know this doesn't sound professional, but this was cool. This is really cool research. So Godspeed with any further work.
Thank you.
I hope everything will be even better than what we see now.
Thank you.
We have now,
let me get, stop sharing, yes.
Yeah. Yes, we see you, not your screen, so that's good, I think. No? Yes. So, as per the agenda, we have now Professor Michele Angelaccio from the University Tor Vergata in Rome, who comes from the Department of Computer Science Systems and Production. And his presentation is on ArcheoSmart Villages towards smart digitalization of eco-museums and archaeological sites. Professor, the virtual floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Okay. Okay, now I share my presentation. Okay.
Do you have screen share as well?
Yes. Okay. Just a minute. I think it's now. Sorry. Can you see now? Can you see? Okay. Good afternoon to all. I come from the University of Roma Vergata, and thanks to the faculty for the invitation, especially to Elisabetta and Irena, and all the staff of the archaeological and the file. Just to introduce, I work in the field of computer science for digital tourism and management in the University of Tor Vergata, and I coordinate a smart tourism lab for several projects in the field of digital tourism and smart tourism. Our goal is to, we plan
Excuse me, Professor, could you make it a slideshow? F5 or just click on slideshow. We can see, but it will be better that way.
Ah, okay. Just a moment. Like this?
Yeah, I think, except,
okay.
Yes, we now see slide. Yes, it is.
Okay, okay, thanks. And then here I want just to introduce some preliminary ideas about models, conceptual models related to how technological and digital systems like for example virtual reality as expressed by the previous presentation, can now act, now how is the situation, where we are going in these several technologies, several methods. I am interested especially to share ideas with computer scientists, management engineering, and archaeologists, but also with other people coming from some heterogeneous fields like urbanists and smart city planner systems. We have a lot of different competence and technologies, all working with the same goal, which is represented by the idea to overcome limitation and try to succeed in enhancing cultural heritage factors. Sorry. And just okay. I don't know if you see all. Okay. Like here, okay. Okay. Just to before to start, the main motivation comes from the idea to introduce this sort of new model and notion. And I will show preliminary ideas that have been designed after some discussion with several groups, both in Italy and in North Macedonia, like the group coordinated by Victor. I try to explain the main motivation for ArcheoSmart Village and corresponding state of art, coming from, especially from smart tourism field. And I will give you some insight, hoping to have a discussion, because as I seen in the agenda, there is a space for a sort of a round table, if we agree. So I want just to give not technological information, because I think that there are very lot of different notions about technologies, but just some heterogeneous ideas and integrating ideas for some sort of corresponding models. In particular, I will show some two related smart tourism projects with some digital information. So this talk is related basically to preliminary ideas and discussion about this sort of a new idea, which corresponds to ArcheoSmart Villages. In practice, we have, in the last 10 years, we have shown literature several ideas related to this, like ArcheoVillage, which corresponds to a sort of organization which try to evolve the notion of museum in, from a museum to a historical village in which visitors and people can join a real experience, also with the help of digital technologies. And the notion of smart technologies for cultural heritage, which corresponds to, for example, augmented reality and sort of digital technologies to enhance cultural heritage. For example, with respect to 3D models which enhance with respect to corresponding digital models, and virtual reality in which 3D models are used to embed in archaeological places, augmented realities raise the questions to enhance for visitors in which we have a mixed reality with by physical and virtual realities. And here I can adjust to, since we have studied several cases of this, and we have combined it in integrated models. I just propose this idea of sort of integration, in order to better understand how technologies could help for cultural heritage enhancement. In my opinion, this is just in my opinion, coming from, especially from social network, to obtain such type of models, we need to cope with the idea of archeocentrism, in which we can put the definition of new trends related to cultural heritage. There are a lot of trends, but here I have just outlined the 3 cases. One emerging from slow tourism, which is now the new trends related to how archaeology and cultural heritage sites, especially in outdoors, but not only, are related to new types of visiting processes, in which we have more time for cultural heritage immersion, in which despite the tendency to just rapidly visit in a little immersive way. We have people which spend a lot of times, for example, several days working or processing together in order to understand better. In addition, this is a very massive tendency involving not only specialists, but also common people. The other tendencies arising from recent advances in technologies, in digital technologies, comes from virtual archaeology. As we have seen before, we must include now not only for particular sites, hidden sites, but also well-known sites like Roman Historical Center, in which there are now the chance to have not always well understood or well defined, but in some way then give a preliminary days or a sketch of the cultural heritage ideas by using low-cost devices and other means. But what is important is there is another social cases activities related to all places in which we have cultural heritage inspirations, like ecomuseums. Here I have put an example coming from a little village, stone village close to Rome, in which there is the chance to have a living feeling like 100 years ago. And for example, we have a new process in which instead to use modern device and cars for garbage collection, people have introduced in the official way the use of by horses and inside the village, because it's impossible to use car and other automotive device in the stone villages. And but this is just an example. So we have a lot of examples in Europe, in several countries, in several European regions, internal regions with little villages, in which there is there are experimenting, but also are living new ideas for urban revitalization, without destroying the cultural heritage site. These are, obviously there are other tendencies, but I have tried to outline 3 different dimensions. And basically all these cases are emerging in the last years by following the tendencies of slow tourism. In particular, here I have outlined slow cultural tourism, in the sense that slow tourism is based to enhance this archeo-sentiment tendency. This is particularly true in internal areas because they have a large covering of small villages, often without developing the industries and large infrastructures. In all these cases, we have several different types of cultural heritage sites. Beyond archaeological sites, we have small villages strictly related to several centuries ago, and other sites in which there is also the chance to have a slow cultural tourism experience, but also protected areas which are defined in correspondence of archaeological and cultural sites. And also agro-food like wine and food sites are strongly related to slow cultural tourism. So we have a complex situation strictly related to the need to define a new model for cultural tourism experience that necessarily must go beyond traditional museum and also a digital museum. For example, another things, an experiment recently adopted in Fiumicino Airport is to put for a long time, several months, an exhibition of Roman sculptures related to local area. And so we have, so people can have a cultural contemplation in everyday life without being in a museum or without visiting an archaeological site, or to focus directly. Obviously, there is the need, the lackness of digital interface, but without this possibility, here we have an examples of different direction. But another direction that I want to mention is given by the blockchain technology. Because in this case, we have an example of digital technologies which can guarantee cultural heritage storage, for example, and accessibility. For example, in the case of the previous presentation, I guess that there is the chance to put in the storage and make accessible on internet and on several platforms or several networks or social networks all the quantity of the input information, both on site or off site. In this case, there is a lot of studies emerging in the last years. One of these is related to the use of blockchain. Here I have just outlined an examples coming from the ancient Roman city of Capua, for which people a digital company working in the field of these archaeological sites have decided to set up a digital coin by using this the same ancient coin represented by a pre-Roman coin by using symbols taken from the Greek alphabet and by using the name of old name of Capua, pre-Roman name. The goal is just to provide an example of digital coin, and in addition with a blockchain network in which the goal is to insert all monuments information and archaeological records related to the old city of Capua.
Professor, just to remind you that we are running out of time slowly, so maybe slowly.
Okay. This just example, but here we have just the outlines of the model in which we can put together all things related to technological things and smart technologies, not only digital but also mobile and ubiquitous, and to guarantee a enhanced cultural experience. For example, a paper related to this is in the recent published some years ago, is related to how smart technologies are related to this in a complex way. And they use, for example, this paper we have the use of a conceptual model, like a philosophical model, introduced by Pine and Gilmore 20 years ago, in which they use 4 dimensions related to the experience. The first one are related to the first impact, aesthetic and entertainment. Entertainment often together education, and the last dimension is related to a sort of escapism, or that means to how cultural heritage and the past and the archeo-sentiment could be expressed in some way with the emotion in the past, emotion for the past. But here I want to give an additional dimension or some different dimension by taking an older model coming from European monastery, in particular a philosophical writing named Itinerarium Mentis in Deum, and written by San Bonaventura in Italy, together other I remember, in which the idea is to use the same approach by using categories, or in Latin modus, in particular 3 modus, in which we have a slow cultural experience model designed according to this some sort of religious model. The first one is given simply by contemplation, and then we have internal model in which the man or people can take advantage of the contemplation. And but what is important is then after this evolution, people must come back to social communities in order to improve their experience, not only alone, but also in a community sense. For example, here we have an example in a village, which now is like a museum, Civita Bagnoregio, which is not a village, like a museum village, which there are practice just visitors and not just a small citizen, small number of citizens. And here I will outline the three levels of this model: contemplation, interior, and external or eternal. And so people can take advantage here of this type of in order to conclude, I would just outline what are my main projects related to this area. I am participating in a local national project named Cultural Metro, in which we are tagging metro stop for local transportation by using cultural heritage monuments in Rome. And I have launched another European project in cooperation with Skopje University related to Via Ignazia by putting together different slow train projects based on cultural heritage. Yeah, just an example of how works the projects related to Cultural Metro, in which we have working path and stops close to physical official metro in Rome, and by using augmented reality, in which people, not only visitors but also citizens, can use in order to move in the city without adding other information device. And here I have just outlined the European projects, which try to put together two cultural paths, one in Italy and one in North Macedonia, all placed in the same ancient Roman road named Via Ignazia, in which we have several places which replace the same role of railway station, close to Rome and close to Skopje, by using, instead of modern semantic, by using the archaeological semantics. So people coming in Europe can revisit the ancient Roman roads by putting together different local reality in a cultural sense, without adding external, modern, incompatible in some sense, and so adding the cultural experience and the archeo sentiment. So this is the main goal. Okay. This will represent our main contributions. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Angelaccio. As far as I can see, there are no questions from the attendees or the other panelists, but maybe we gather some more inspiration or more questions and we keep them for the end of the session. I think that would also be a fine way to maybe summarize everything that we've done.
Okay, if you would, I can suggest you can use also chat session.
Yes. That's why I use the Q&A part and the chat part, and there are no questions. So if any of the panelists have questions, please.
Okay. Okay, now I stop share.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, thank you.
Do any of the other panelists have questions, please? As I said, if not now, maybe if we have time at the end of the session, or even if we don't, we'll find time. We'll make this bubble of time to maybe do some fast general discussion.
Okay, thank you.
So we continue now with a member from our faculty, Professor Boban Petrovski from the Institute for History at the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of St. Cyril and Methodius in Skopje. The title of his presentation is The Time of Tzar Samuel, Authentic, Common or Shared History. I can't see him. I can't see you.
Hello, I'm here. I'm here.
There is no video. You should click on video.
What about audio?
We hear audio.
Yeah, I see. I'm freezed here.
Okay, but we can hear you. So maybe start.
I don't know why. I don't know. But here.
Okay. So
is it better now?
Before, if you can do it in around 15 minutes, that would be great. So
yes,
please,
yes.
the virtual floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to say first that I'm really pleased to be part of this session here. Some of the name of in this session, I have read some books from there. Some of them I know them personally. Allow me first to say that I'm really proud being a part of Faculty of Philosophy. I mean, I'm as a member now, as a professor, and more than 30 years I'm at the Faculty of Philosophy, starting as a student in the early 90s. Seeing it, how it grows, and a kind of building it. My topic is kind of provocative one. It is first row of the topic is usual historical one, and the second one it could be seen as a kind of a provocation, which is not within the usual historical issues. I will explain through my presentation. I mean, the time of Samuel is in fact the period 1,000 years ago. The emperor, Tsar or king Samuel, and his immediate successors, his son Gabriel Radomir and his nephew Ivan Vladislav. But even today, there are lots of questions which are not clear or which are not resolved so far. So there are room for some other explanations, sticking to the sources, of course. Here I have choose primarily contemporary sources, which are Slavic one, and Byzantine sources, and I have chosen only one Latin source, which is from a domestic origin. Here I mean on the priest of Duklia, Pope Dukljanin, who writes on Latin, but he lives in this area, in the Balkan area, so he could be considered as a local, as a domestic source, although he writes on Latin. The usual historical topics are terminological ones, or chronological ones, or onomastic even, whether the name of the Samuel is Samuel or Samuel or Samuel, or some other historical issue is locating and recognizing the area of toponymy where some of the battles have happened, or there are some issues of entity character, the origin of the Samuel, of its family, whether it is from local origin or is from Armenian or some other origin. But the time of Samuel, his government and his state is more precise in our contemporary. It is precisely this issue that has generated undeniable interest among many historians in Macedonia, but not only in our country, although in Bulgaria, especially there, in Greece, also in Serbia, and in some other countries around the world. I would like to stress here that this question, the issue of Samuel time, his government, his state, is nowadays is a quite of hot political. Okay, thank you. Political issue. Okay, now it's better. So excuse me. Having in mind standing mutual commission between Macedonia and Bulgaria for the resolving historical disputes between the two countries. I would like to point out thesis in historiography about this topic, about time of Samuel. The first thesis is that emphasizes that Samuel state is a creation that came about as a result of eternal local ethno-social development of society. So here, based on sources, a favorable moment was used when four brothers, prominent fellow lords in the southwestern part of Macedonia, well known as Komitopuli, the sons of Kometopul Nikola, take advantage of the capture of Bulgarian Emperor Boris II by Byzantine Emperor John Tzimiski to overthrow the former Bulgarian government in a part of then Bulgarian state, the southwestern part, and seize control over their own power. Soon after, they were able to organize their own institutions, which began to operate of the new state called Samuel state, according to the most prominent representative Samuel. Within this thesis, there are at least two theories. First one, which appeared in the historiography, was the thesis that was the theory of South Slavic state, meaning the state of ethnic Slavic. This is the state of ethnic Slavic formed by local Slavs, and this thesis emphasized Serbian researcher Prolović in the beginning of the 20th century. In the book published in 1908, and then followed by prominent researchers such as Ostrogorsky, and in his History of Byzantium, and Ferluga in the edition of publishing the Byzantine sources for the people of Yugoslavia. This was an edition. The second theory is the theory of the Slavic Macedonian character of the state, so-called ethnocentric theory, meaning that state was formed by the Macedonian Slavs, or Slavs inhabited in the territory of Macedonia, the whole region of Macedonia, not only part of, or some a territory of some state, the whole Macedonia. Settled there in the end of 6th and the beginning of the 7th century. This theory has lots of supporters. I will just choose 3-4 of them. I don't like to bother you with the names. From Serbia, Dragašević, Tomić, Marković, Anastasijević. From Bulgaria, Stojkov. From Macedonia, Kosta Adžijevski, Aleksandar Atanasovski, Milan Boškovski, and so on. From Croatia, Stjepan Antoljak. Then Ivo Goldstein published his book in Zagreb in 1995. Then Neven Budak, he's acting professor at the Faculty of Philosophy Institute of History at in Croatia, in Zagreb, published his book in 2003. And so on. But astonishingly, I would like to point out that Bulgarian historians state that position of the Macedonian historiography are in fact are not original one, but they are actually following the position of the Serbian historiography. So it is a kind of not original or making some forgeries on the sources and so on. And there is a third theory of autonomous character of the territories of former Samuel states, namely theory of autonomy, meaning that especially after the conquest of the state of Samuel state, Byzantine Empire grants autonomy to the regions of the former Samuel state. The supporters of this thesis are from Greece, Nikifor Moschopoulos, and from Serbia, Bojana Krsmanović and Alexander Loma, published their work in Zbornik Radova in Oslo, 1997, using the Michailos Pselos phrase, "Skitikes autonomias." This was the first thesis. Thesis for the Samuel, Slavic character of the Samuel state. The second thesis highlights the idea that Samuel state is actually a simple extension of the first Bulgarian Empire. What is interesting here, that this thesis was firstly emphasized not from the Bulgarian historians, but from the Bulgarian publicists such as Rakovsky, Karavelov, and Hristo Botev. And then after, in the end of the 19th century, after 1978, Bulgarian historian followed this thesis, such as Bozhilov and Derzhavin, Angelov, Lyuzelev, and so on. On this issue, particularly refers Mitkopanov in his newest book, The Blinded State, published in Brill in 2019. So, can you read all these arguments there? Within there are theories. A theory of so-called Renovatio Imperii. Do you hear me?
The sound got weird, but now it's fine. Sorry.
Am I speaking too fast or something?
Sorry. There was some weird sound in the background, so I signaled, but it's okay now. So continue.
Because I saw you wave.
I did, yeah, because we couldn't hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was saying that within this thesis there are two theories. Theory of Renovatio Imperii, meaning simply continuation of the first Bulgarian Empire, and the second one is the second theory is called so-called Western Bulgarian Empire, which means that at that time, I mean, in the time when the Bulgarian Emperor was captured by the Byzantine Emperor John Chemirsky, Eastern Bulgarian territory, Eastern Bulgarian part was included within the Byzantine Empire, but the western part of the empire continued with its life. So this is the theory of Western Bulgarian Tsardom. Within this theory, there are positions of the scientists, such as, in fact, in the western part of the Tsardom, they call it. Actually, there are several principalities, and that was a conglomerate of the principalities and so on. But these are theses. Let me emphasize you the sources. Let's stick to the sources. What the sources says about this. As I said, I have chosen some a few sources, sticking to the contemporary ones. Cyrillic sources are inscription from 1993 from village German, well known as Samuel's inscription. In this inscription, there is a sentence: "I, Samuel, servant of God, So without any ethnic or some other additions. I, Samuel, servant of God, Rab Božji, that's all. Bitola inscriptions of Ivan. Its datation is from 1015, or even there are theories that the inscription is from 13th century, from 1234. This is the position of our Professor Horace Land. This Bitola inscription, Bitola plate, there is ongoing discussion whether it is original one or not, or how much is original, how much not. There is a discussion about the originality of this issue. One of the last researchers who referred to this source was Stoikov, mentioned, the Bulgarian citizen, who recently in 2015 challenged the authenticity of the inscription in several parts. I will stress here only the ethnic ones. The title and the epithet of the ruler in the first row, phrase Samodržec, which is equivalent to autokrator, which means independent ruler, and the adjective Bulgarsko, which is probably which is not true, because it's supposed to be according to that period, it's supposed to be Bulgarom, which is common for the epoch, having in mind if we compare the seals and the charters from the Bulgarian emperor from this period. Then the fourth row, phrase Жизнь Bulgarom, which is quite unusual, having in mind that actually the ruler owns, at that time, the ruler owns the territory and the inhabitants who are actually subjuged to him, and not vice versa. And the sixth row, which is also quite unusual, the phrase Bulgar, the original phrase is, I quote, Bulgarin rodom. So what will be the English translation? The English translation could be Bulgarian by origin, but could also be born as Bulgarian, which is different. This part of the where was Samuel state, where was the capital of the Samuel state, Prespa Lake, and then Ohrid, and the town of Ohrid was a part at that time, was part of Bulgaria. But after the end of the first Bulgarian empire in 1971, there was an uprising led by Komitopoulos, four brothers, and who started a new state. Bulgarian, born as Bulgarian, could mean that he is born within Bulgarian state. What is astonishing here is that there is too many referring on the ethnicity in six row. There are 3 times mentioning the ethnicity, which even for the Bulgarian researcher Zaimov, who is one of the first publisher of this material, was quite unusual. So, do I have 2-3 minutes or something? Sorry. Okay. I will now go to Byzantine sources. The contemporary sources are Leo Diakonos, and John Geometer. Leo Jaconus, whose work is from 1992, actually lived in the town in the time of Samuel. He knows only 4 Bulgarian rulers. Please, I would like to pay attention here. Only 4 Bulgarian rulers: Bulgar, Simeon, Peter, and Boris II. And for Samuel and his soldiers, he used a phrase "skid swords." And in the same time, for the Bulgarian Emperor Boris II, used phrase "master of the Bulgarians." John Geometer, who writes panegyrics for the Basilius II. His works are from the late 10th century. So he also lives in the time of Samuel. In one of them, addressed as to the Komitopoulos, John Geometer writes that he, meaning Komitopoulos Samuel, was burning the West. He appeared, I'm quoting, burning the West. He appeared at the end of the time of Emperor Foca. Byzantine Emperor Foca died in 1969. In the other poem, for the defeat of the Romaioi, meaning Byzantines, in the Bulgarian Gorge, which refers to the Byzantine defeats in the Trajan's Gate, eastern of Sofia, in 1986. Geometer names Samuel's army as a Mysian arrows. So this is the position of the John Geometer. Only in one poem addressed to the Bulgarians, naming them as Bulgarian tribe. There is another source, contemporary source from the beginning of the 11th century. Three charters of Basilius, Byzantine Emperor Basilius, issued to the Ohrid Archbishopric, which are also challenged in the historiography whether they are originals or not. But I will stick to the phrases in that. First charter addresses on the taxes during the Samuel time and the taxes that the people should continue to pay now to the Byzantine state. The second charter mentioned archbishop and parishes of Ohrid Archbishopric, naming them as Archbishop of Bulgaria and Bulgarian Honorius, which is acceptable in the sense of referring to the archbishop and parishes within Tema Bulgaria. What is Tema Bulgaria? After the end of the Samuel state, after the 1018, Byzantine established their power and their administrative structure in the area that they defeated of the Samuel and his successors, Gavril Enion Vladislav, and Vladislav died in 1018, and they established a military administrative unit called Tema Bulgaria. They are establishing this type of administrative unit, Temata, in the whole Byzantium. So this is not new. With the center in Skopje. That's why they are addressing the Archbishop of Ohrid as the Archbishop of Bulgaria, meaning of the territory of the Tema Bulgaria. The territory of the Tema Bulgaria, I mean, I don't have sufficient time, is up to Sava and Danube at the north, and east of the town of Sofia in the east, and on the west up to Albania nowadays border, and the south up to Thessaloniki. So it is quite wide, quite big territory. In the third charter, there is a mentioning of 3 bishoprics Servia, Stan, and Ber. These bishoprics, these are actually small towns, castles in the southwestern part of Macedonia.
Sorry, could you please slowly conclude now?
Yes, I will. And three bishoprics are they are spread in southwestern part of Macedonia, but in the charter it is written that they are in Bulgaria. So it is undoubtedly mean that this is within the Temata Bulgaria, and as Petar Komatina stressed in his recent I'm concluding now. In his recent research with original name Pojam Bugarske, the notion of Bulgaria. He said that the term Bulgaria after the 1018 originated from the Tema Bulgaria. I have more to say, but I will leave the room for the questions or remarks. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you for your presentation and for keeping the time. Let me just quickly check if there are questions or comments. I don't see any yet, so the same goes for this presentation as well. That maybe if someone gets inspired in the meanwhile, or
yes.
Or anything,
yeah. I really hope so.
Yes.
I will be here for the general discussion.
Yes. I mean, again, it is not. No.
I know.
Let's not. Yeah. My point is, even though there is no general discussion anticipated in the program, we can do it ourselves. So that's the beauty in being virtually present. No one is going to kick us out of the room and go like, we need to clean now, please leave. So that's not going to happen, and it's good. Thank you again. Now we continue with Professor Jadranka Prolović from the Department of Art History of the University of Vienna, Austria, with a presentation on the topic, the representation of the Mandelion, or in the medieval fresco painting in the Balkans. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the word. I tried Googling it and I wasn't sure, so I'm leaving it to you. Again, if you could please keep the time around 15-20 minutes, and the floor is yours, please. Do you have screen? Yes, you do.
Ja ću da vam govorim na srpskom, nadam se da ćete me razumeti, bar domaćini. Za inostrane goste žao mi je, ali nisam prosto znala da će to tako da bude. Pre svega želim da čestitam domaćini jubilej njihovog vašeg fakulteta i čast mi je što mogu da učestvujem u ovoj proslavi i ujedno zahvaljujem na pozivu. U mom referatu se radi o nerukotvorenoj slici Hristovoj, znači o slici koja nije načinjena rukom čoveka ili bogu čoveka, već na jedan čudesan, nerukotvoreni način. Širenjem hrišćanstva i sve većim obožavanjem ikona nastale su i legende o različitim nerukotvorenim Hristovim slikama koje je sam Bog načinio i ostavio ljudima za sećanje i obožavanje. Prve legende ovog tipa nastale su već u 4. veku, a među najstarijim i najcenjenijim slikama obraza Hristova su jedna iz Kamulijane i druga iz Edese. Za razliku od slike iz Kamulijane, sveti ubrus iz Edese, poznat pod nazivom Mandelion, preživao je kontraverze za vreme ikonoklazma, pa je postao i najobožavanija slika pravoslavnog sveta. Po predanju, Mandelion je nastao za kralja Edese Avgara, koji je bio Hristov poštovalac. Po toj legendi, Avgar je bio neizlečivo bolestan, pa je poslao svog slugu Ananija Hristu, zamolivši ga da dođe u Edesu kako bi ga izlečio i istovremeno izbjegao proganjanje od strane Jevreja. Hristos mu je odgovorio da mora da ostane u Jerusalimu kako bi ispunio svoju misiju, ali će mu posle Vaznesenja poslati apostola Tadeja u pomoć. Ovo pismo je postalo poznata relikvija Edese koja je grad štitila od nedaća. Njegova slava donekle je izblijedila posle 6. veka kada je u Edesi otkrivena i Avgarova nerukotvorena Hristova slika. Po proširenoj verziji legende, kralj je u Jerusalim poslao dobrog slikara da bi naslikao portret spasitelja. Pošto on to nije pošlo za rukom da uradi, Hristos je uzeo platno i na njemu otisnuo svoje ovlaženo lice. Avgar je ovu sliku primio uz veliko poštovanje i odmah osetio olakšanje, a posle krštenja po dolasku apostola Tadeja on je doživeo izlečenje. U znak zahvalnosti kralj Edese je Mandelion postavio iznad gradskih vrata kao filakterijom. Tokom vladavine bezbožnog Avgarovog unuka ova slika je zazinana zajedno sa upaljenim kandilom i tako zaboravljena. U vreme persijske opsade Edese 544. godine, a posle jednog preskazanja u snu, zazidani Mandelion sa još gorećim kandilom i otiskom na keramidi pronašao je episkop edeski Eulalios. Kako je ova slika spasla Edesu od persijskog pokoravanja, ponovo je postala glavna relikvija ovog grada. Čuvana je u Melkijskoj katedrali Svete Sofije sve do 944. godine, kada su Vizantijci posle pobede nad Arapima uspeli da je otkupe. Za nju su morali da oslobode dobar deo zauzetih teritorija i 200 muslimanskih zarobljenika, a i da plate visoku cenu od čak 12.000 srebrnjaka. Uz veliku svečanost 944. godine Mandelion je prenet u Carigrad, te se čuvao u crkvi Bogorodice od Stvara sve do latinskog osvajanja vizantijske prestonice, kada je odnet na zapad gde mu se gubi svaki trag. Kult ove slike proširio se na ostale zemlje vizantijskog kulturnog kruga, a naročitu popularnost postigla je u Rusiji. Njena popularnost kod pravoslavnih hrišćana ogleda se i u nastajanju mnogih replika, među koje spadaju i one izvedene u monumentalnom slikarstvu Balkana. Za razliku od minijaturnog slikarstva i ikonopisa, Avgarova legenda u monumentalnom slikarstvu izgleda ređe predstavljana. Danas je poznata samo jedna takva naslikana priča i to na Balkanu, u manastirskoj crkvi u Matejiću, nastala između 1348. i 1352. godine. Kao podloga za njeno ilustrovanje poslužila je srpska verzija staroslovenske priče o Avgaru, koja je zabeležena u 2 srpska srednjovekovna rukopisa, a po kojoj je apostol Luka kao Avgarov slikar poslat u Carigrad. Zanimljivo je da je u Matejiću ova legenda prikazana u okviru ciklusa apostola i to u delu u kome je predstavljena priča o apostolu Luki, slikaru Bogorodice. U većini crkava, pa tako i na Balkanu, slikan je samo Mandelion, često u pratnji keramide. Uz spretno lociranje ovih slika je na simboličan način ispričana priča o nerukotvornom nastanku i demonstrirana njihova čudotvorna zaštitnička moć. Nerukotvorna slika se zbog svog zaštitničkog karaktera predstavlja iznad ulaza u hram ili manastirski kompleks, kao što je to nekad bila postavljena na gradskim vratima Edesa. Zbog te apotropejske uloge ona se slikala i na statički osetljivim mestima kao što je podnežje kupole ili triumfalni luk. U srednjem vizantijskom periodu Mandelion je najčešće prikazivan kao zategnut ubrus u obliku kvadrata ili izduženog pravouglnika. U kasnom vizantijskom periodu dominira viseći ubrus okačen na dva kraja, najčešće ovešalice različitog oblika. Hristov lik na keramidi naslikan je, kako mu ime govori, na cigli, keramidi, a pošto se ovdje radi o egzaktnoj slici Mandeliona, ponekad je na cigli naslikana i struktura platna. Kako pokazuje gruzijski primjera, ponajviše onaj iz Telovani iz 8. i 9. veka, nerukotvoreni obraz je prikazivan u monumentalnom slikarstvu i pre ikonoklazma. Snaženjem kulta ove slike posle njenog prenosa u Carigrad 944. godine uvećava se i broj njenih predstava u monumentalnom slikarstvu. Jedan od najstarijih tipova nerukotvornog obraza u kronološkom programu crkve u odnosu na njeno mesto na kome se slika jeste onaj po kome je slika smeštena iznad ulaza u crkvu. Među čuvanim primjerima u monumentalnom slikarstvu na Balkanu takva predstava se nalazi u hrama Svete Sofije u Ohridu, gde je Mandelion naslikan na istočnom zidu narteksa iznad ulaza u naos. Tačnije on se nalazi iznad lunete prolaza na koje je naslikan Patokator, čiji se lik preslikava na svetom ubrusu, što je jasna aluzija na ovu sliku i njen božanski prototip. Njeno nebesko poreklo potvrđuju i predstave anđele koje se nalaze na krstastom svodu iznad nje. Skoro vek i po posle Ohrida nastale su najstarije slike na Kipru, i to u Kato Lefkari u Elaguderi, gde je nerukotvorni obraz uglavnom slikan iznad ulaza u crkvu. Na Balkanu ovakve predstave se nalaze, na primer, u Svetom Nikoli Kasničkom u Kosturu, u Bačkovu, u Radišljevoj kapelji u Studenici, Sopočani, manastiru Gradac, Dragutinovoj kapelji u Đurđevim Supovima i u crkvi Svete Sofije u Mistri, gde je Mandelion okružen svetim ratnicima koji su kao čuvari postavljeni uz ulaz u crkvu. Naročito su zanimljive predstave Mandeliona i keramina u Dragutinovoj kapelji Đurđevih Stupova, koja se nalazi u kuli na ulazu u manastir. Pa je svojevrsni stražari, one štite ulaz u svetinju, što je jedini primer ove vrste u srednjem veku. Na isti način, nerukotvoreni obraz je u postvizantijskom periodu slika na ulazu u manastire Svete Gore, pri čemu se ne smije isključiti mogućnost da one tu ponavljaju stare predstave istog tipa koje su uništene tokom vremena. Među najstarijim ikonološkim tipovima Mandeliona je i onaj kada je ova slika smeštena u oltarskom prostoru rezervisanom za nevidljive nebeske sile. Shodno tome tu se naglašava nebesko poreklo nerukotvorenog obraza kao pravog svetla, koje kao sunce pravde dolazi sa istoka. I u pomenutoj gruzijskoj crkvi Telovani iz 8. ili 9. veka Mandelion je smešten u oltarskoj apsidi. Ovakva ikonologija se posle prenosa slika u Carigrad razvijela dalje, naročito u vreme teoloških diskusija o liturgiji u 11. i 12. veku. Tada Mandelion dobija svoje mesto ne samo između svetih otaca iz predstave liturgije, već i na zidovima džakonikona i protezisa. Na taj način je i sama slika kao vid euharistične žrtve postala aktivan učesnik u liturgiji. Kako se to objašnjava u službi za praznik nerukotvornog obraza, On predstavlja beskrvnu žrtvu koja se podnosi kroz liturgiju. Bio je to odgovor ikonoklastima koji su zapostavljali čovečansku prirodu Hrista i u euharističkim česticama videli jedinu legitimnu sliku Boga čoveka. U crkvi u Edisi Mandelion je za vreme liturgije stavljena uzvišeno postolje na pločaju časne trpeze, a za vreme službe u Svetoj Sofiji prilikom njenog prenoska u Carigrad dobio je mesto na samoj časnoj trpezi. Tako on isto koji njegove predstave u najsvetijem delu hrama postao deo realne, ali i slikane liturgije. Jedan interesantan primer predstavlja na Mandelion nalazi se u crkvi Arhanđela Mihajla u Rili. Nastao je najverovatnije krajem 12. stoljeća. Sveti obrus se likom Hrista Emanuila naslikan je iznad oltarskog prozora i flankiran presama svetih apostola Petra i Pavla, koji svedoče njegovu autentičnost i nastanak u apostolskom vremenu. Emanuil je jedna od hipostaza spasitelja koja se pojavljivala na Mandelionu za vreme njegove čudotvorne promene u određenim delovima dana. Njegovo predstavljanje u Rili mora se dovesti u vezu i sa teološkim diskusijama, čiji je zaključak bio da se u liturgiji kao žrtva prihvati lik deteta kao simbol najsmernijeg oblika čoveka. Interesantna je predstava u crkvi Svetog Nikole Rodijasa u Arti, gde je Mandelion smešan između svetih otaca koji služe liturgiju, a ispod oltarske bifore koja predstavlja baldahin nad oltarom sa Mandelionom. Slične predstave nalaze se u crkvama Peloponeza, recimo Svetom Sozontu u Irakiju i Svetim Nikoli u Kampiji. Naročito je interesantna predstava u Poganovu, u kojoj je keramida smeštena na oltarskoj trpezi u sceni pričešća apostola. Sličnu ideju sadrži i slika Mandeliona smeštena uz istu predstavu u crkvi Svetog Nikole Orfanosa u Solunu. Predstave nerukotvorenog obraza u proskomidiji i džakonikonu u vezi su sa simbolom ovih prostora i njihovom ulogom u liturgiji. U proskomidiji se za vreme liturgije, čiji se deo zove proskomidija, pripremaju svete čestice, pa je tako i ova slika kao euharistična žrtva u to uključena. Najstariji primjeri se nalaze u Kapadokiji, a na Balkanu u crkvi Svetog Nikola u mestu Hagios Nikolaos kod Monevasije i u hramu manastira Sopočana, gde su Mandelion i keramide naslikani jedan ispod drugog na ulazu u proskomidiju. Ova slika je dosta oštećena, pa vam zato ne pokazujem. Predstava Mandeliona u Sopočanima nalazi se i u džakonikonu, kao deo Deizisa, zajedno sa predstavom koja je naslikana u džakonikonu hrama u Ljubotenu. Ona je ilustracija molitve koja se izgovara u ovom prostoru za vreme liturgije. Iz tih razloga je u Ljubotinu ispod keramide u niši naslikana i Bogorodica Oranta. Još jedna slika Svetog Urbusa u džakonikonu nalazi se u crkvi Bogorodice Perivlepte u Mistri, gde je Mandelion doveden u vezu sa nedremanim okom kao ilustracija liturgije na Veliku subotu i aluzija na Hrista žrtvu. Nerukotvoreni obraz se slika i na triumfalnom luku. Najstariji primer se nalazi u sirskoj crkvi Daje Marmuša al-Habaši, to je iz 11. veka, a na Balkanu u Svetom Nikoli Kasničkom u Kosturu. Na istom mestu je naslikan i u Protatonu, u Solunu, recimo u kapeli Svetog Eftimija i u hramu Svetog Nikole Orfanosa, a potom u Veriji, u Berende, u crkvi u Karanu i u nekim drugim hramovima. U većini crkava predstava nerukotvorenog obraza nalazi se u neposrednom odnosu sa nerukotvorenom predstavom Bogorodice koja je smeštena u polikaloti apsade. To lepo vidite ovde u Svetom Nikoli Orfanosu, ispod Mandeliona je Bogorodica. Postoji više tipova Bogorodice nerukotvorene, Blahemitisa, Hagiosolitisa, Episkepsis i druge. Neke od njih bile su čuvane u crkvama posvećenim različitim nerukotvorenim ikonama, kao što su ikona iz Diospolisa, Lida, Abramiotisa, u Carigradu i druge. Učestala predstava ovog tipa Bogorodice na Balkanu, naročito u Makedoniji u 14. veku, može se dovesti u vezi sa poštovanom ikonom iz crkve Panagija Ahiropitus u Soluni. Predstave Mandiljema na triumfalnom luku često su dovedene u neposrednu vezu sa scenom blagovesti, pri čemu je ova slika odjek inkarnacije Logosa. Takvih predstava ima, na primjer, u Svetom Nikoli Kasničog u Kostoru, u kapeli Svetog Eftimija u Solunu, Veri u južnoj kapeli hrama Bogorodice Perivlepte u Ohridu, a ponekad je Mandelion naslikan i u sastavu scene blagoslovesti, kao što se to vidio na ovoj predstavi iz Ohridske Perivlepte. U Poganovu je Sveti Ubus smešan uz sliku silaska Svetog Duha na apostola u crkvi Svetog Ilije u Vraneščici iz 16. veka. Mandelion drže apostoli iz scene Vaznesenja. Na predstavama Mandeliona u okviru scene Vaznesenja se simbolično pokazuje kako se Hristos posle zemaljske misije vazneo na nebo, a ljudima kao zalog ostavio sliku da nastave njegovu misiju. Najzanimljivije su predstave u Pološkom i Borju. Mandelion u hramu u Pološkom smeštan iznad Bogorodice nerukotvorene koja se nalazi u apsidi. Između apostola pričešće za drveće koje mu daje simboliku večnog feniksa za beskratnu rajsku obnovu. Teološki posmatrano ovo se dovodi u vezi sa vaskrsenjem. U crkvi Vaznesenja Hristovog u Borju Bogorodica iz Vaznesenja drži Mandelion u svojim rukama. I najzad u kupolnim crkvama Mandelion i keramijum su po pravilu smešteni na istočnoj i zapadnoj strani između pendantifa. Ova ikonologija razvila se naročito u 11. veku sa promenama u arhitekturi kupolnih hramova, a s tim u vezi i njihovim slikanim programom. Smešanjem između evanđelista naglašeno je da su takve slike jednake evanđeljima. U rukopisama to je iskazano priključivanjem Avgarove legende o evanđeljima na kraju knjige. Ovakvim rasporedom slika ispričana je i legenda o njihovom nastanku. Sunce pravde sa istoka, a to je Mandelion, zrači i ostavlja trag na keramidi, smešteno je na zapadu. Takvim zračenjem Mandelion nastale su i keramide iz Hieropolisa, Emese i Edese. Najstariji primjer nerukotvornih slika između pendantifa nalazi se u Pskovu, u Miroškom manastiru iz 30. godina 12. veka. A poznato je da su postojali u Đurđevim stipovima oko 1175. godine, a o čemu je dokaz sačuvan na staroj fotografiji. Ostali primjeri nalaze se u Studenici, u Bojani, Bogorodici Perivlepti, u Ohridu, kao i da zadužbinama kraja Milutina, zatim još u Peći, Kučevištu, Andreašu i nekim drugim crkvama. U studenti se slika potpisao ispod rukotvorenog obraza, što je jasna aluzija za njegov božanski dar prilikom slikanja, pri čemu njegova ruka, vođena božanskim nadahnućem, ponavlja ono što je Bog prvi stvorio. Hvala na pažnji.
Hvala vam što ste tako dobro završili u 20 minuta. Thank you very much for keeping the time. Now we continue, and for your presentation, I'm sorry, I'm so focused on being strict that I forget to thank people for their presentations. Thank you. We continue now with Nikolina Spasovska from the, I suppose...
Excuse me, Maria? Maria?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Should we wait for the end of the session for the questions of the presentation, of each presentation, or should we make some...
decide, did we? No, we can do it now. We can do it now, but quickly. Excellent idea. Better to do it now if you want. If not, at the end. It's all open.
Yes.
If you have a question,
A
please.
short remark. I was listening the presentation of about Mandelion, but should I speak on English, Madam Prolović? Should I speak on English or Serbian or Macedonian, whatever? I would like to address to presentation of Jadranka Prolović. Da. Hoću nešto da vas pitam, da.
Koji jezik može? Na kojima će diskusija? Možete na makedonskom.
Ok, može. Знаете што, ме интересира зошто го употребивте Матеич, за Матеич. Само тоа ви беше напишано на кирилица и формата Матеич. Бидејќи формите може да бидат Матеиче и Матејич. Затоа ви прашувам, тоа ме интересира. Од каде ми доаѓа прашањето? Прашањето ми доаѓа од следново. Да речеме манастирот Милешева. Манастирот Милешева.
Kad sam pravila prezentaciju, počela sam prvo da pišem na čirilici, pa onda sam mislila, ajde možda biće nekog ko ne zna da čita čirilicu, a pošto mi u čiriličnom krugu uglavnom znamo latinicu, onda sam prešla na čirilicu. Tako je Matejč ostao. Matejč sam napisala čisto bez J, zato što mi tako kažemo u Srbiji Matejč.
Da, ali da li je ispravnija forma sa J, Matejić? Zato što to je forma Matejić ili Matejić.
Bez J, ali se kaže i sa J. Ali je ispravnije bez J, Matejč.
Znate zašto? Zato što kod mene je dilema u odnosu na manastir Mileševa. Da li je Mileševa ili je Mileševo? Ja sam se raspitivao, tražio sam u izvorima, u literaturi i to je uvek u padežu i teško je odgatnuti.
Pa to što vam kažem, može da se upotrebi i jedno i drugo. I Mileševa i Mileševo. Može jedno i drugo. Neko kaže Mileševa, a neko kaže Mileševo. Znači,
da. To sam primetio, tako i u literaturi. Ok, hvala vam.
Molim.
That's all, thank you.
Have we got anything else? Let me check the chat and no questions in the chat and the questions and answers. So we continue now with Nikolina Spasovska from, I suppose, the Department of Art History as well, from the University of Vienna, Austria.
Exactly. Do you hear me?
Yes, just your title is The Painting Studio of John Therianos and the Images of the Monks and Hymnographers in Saint Sophia of Ohrid. Please keep the time, same rules go. Yes, we can hear you. The floor is yours, please.
So before starting my presentation, I would like to say that I'm delighted to be a part of the Jubilee Conference of the Faculty of Philosophy. I would like to thank Professor Jadranka Prolović for all the support and guidance that you provided me during the writing of my thesis. And I'm also grateful to Professor Elizaveta Dimitrova for her advice and for inviting me to this conference. So one moment, please.
Do you have screen share as well?
I do, but it will take a while, I think. I cannot find the PowerPoint. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Okay.
Make it all slides with F5, but just click like what did Professor Angelaccio did previously? Yeah.
This presentation is an attempt to further increase existing knowledge on the painting program, as well as the complex iconological concept of the second floor of the narthex of the Cathedral Church of St. Sophia. Commissioned by the Austrian Archbishop Nicholas, the great master John Terrianus and his collaborators created the fresco decoration of this sacred space between 1346 and 1315. Accordingly, in absence of inscriptions, this presentation aims to identify in particular one monk and 4 hymnographers depicted on the northern part of the eastern wall of this holy space. John Terrianus and his associates painted a composition of the Domitian of the Mother of God in a blind dome and the ecumenical councils on the wall, as well as the scene of David's repentance and the vision of Peter of Alexandria on the north and south tympanums, respectively. Standing figures of distinguished monks represented in the lower zone, while the southern part of the eastern wall contains a composition of the daisies and figures of Patriarch Ionicus, Archbishop Nicholas, and St. Clement of Ohrid in monastic garment. The row of century figures on the northern part of the eastern wall of the second wall of the narthex begins with the 2 half-length figures of monks whose name and description have fortunately survived. The first in the row is Athanasius the Antonite, who founded the monastic life of the monastery of the great Lava Donatus. He is accompanied by the dark-skinned Moses of Ethiopia, known as the monk who managed to transform from a sinner and a murderer into a believer and a saint. Next to the depiction of Moses of Ethiopia, who should be understood as a personification of the process of overcoming the passions and temptations of life and ascending to holiness, stands a monk whose image is well preserved, but whose name's inscription unfortunately is not. He is also painted as a half-length figure frontally and holds in his left hand an open scroll that displays a well-legible text. His gaze is directed towards the holy poets on his left, as if the ancient figure himself is surprised that he has not aroused the interest of the scholars so far and has not been recognized by his name. Considering the recognizable iconographic features of this monastic figure, it can be suggested that St. John Climacus is painted here. The saint is known as the author of the work Ladder of Divine Ascent, which became popular monastic literature and a practical guide to holy monks for their spiritual upliftment and transformation. The way he is presented, the firm line of the drawing, the refinedly modeled face, the bright ochre tones of the complexion, the soft peaked cheeks and the greenish-blue shadows reveal Terrianus' artistic style. Though of a later date, the Harmonie of Dionysius of Furna gives a rather scanty description of the figure of John Climacus as an old man with a long beard, while in the Harmonie of the Zurawski family, he is similarly noted as an elder with a large beard. Painters generally adhere to the prescribed iconographic type, but differences in his appearance are often encountered. So his beard is usually of medium length, while the length of his hair varies. The oldest surviving depiction of this eminent monk is found in the 9th century Saqqara Parallella manuscript, where he is portrayed as an elderly person with a cowl and grey hair and a short, round beard. Another template was used by a miniature painting in the Sinai Codex 417 from the middle of the 10th century, in which Climacus exhibits thick bangs on his forehead and round beard of medium length. However, it seems that the iconography of this saint was formed in the 11th century. This assessment is based on his likenesses in the mosaics of the monastery of Hosius, Lucas, and Phocus in Neamonian Chios, where this ancient figure is pictured with grey hair that connects his sideburns into a pointed semi-long beard. Along with the casual and variations of the hairstyle, this figure of the saint with the pointed beard is also encountered in later works, which is exemplified in the portrait created by John Terrianus in St. Sophia. In a 16th century portrait in the church of the Mother of God in Studenica, which resembles the one painted during the time of St. Sava, Serbia, this eminent monk is portrayed with a similar physiognomy as the figure in St. Sophia. A pointed beard adorns his chin, which in this case falls in strength onto his chest. Slightly more rounded in the face, less ascetic, and with an extremely wavy semi-long beard is the Climacus image in Prototon. The depiction of Climacus in St. Sophia in Ohrid complies with that in Grajanica to a certain extent as well, although his hair is somewhat denser there. Less novel, where his beard is divided into two long strands, and in Echeny, even though he's portrayed there as a middle-aged man with light brown hair. His image in Fresco's monastery also displays similar physiognomic characteristics, except for the fact that he has dense, disheveled hair there, imparting a rougher appearance. Yet, the greatest resemblance in the physiognomy and iconography of this figure of St. Sophia in Ohrid exists with the figure of St. John Climacus in the Church of the Mother of God in Matice, where along with his portrayal there is an inscription with his name in Old Slavic, which confirms his identity. He is depicted as an old man with grey hair, nicely shaped straight beard of medium length, and a face that has prominent cheekbones and a protruding forehead. Unlike the monk in St. Sophia, in Matice, John Climacus carries a closed scroll with both hands. The exceptional iconographic and stylistic similarity of this ancient figure in St. Sophia in Ohrid with its portrayal in Matice can be further explained with the fact that John Terrianus and his collaborators, as is believed, carried out the fresco decoration in this magnificent church between 1348 and 1352 as well. The proposal to identify this monk in St. Sophia as John Climacus is based not only on the great iconographic resemblance to the figure in Matice, but also on the similar location where this distinguished monk is presented in both churches. In Matice, St. John Climacus is displayed on the north wall of the narthex, as in St. Sophia, in close proximity to the famous eremites and below the composition of the ecumenical council. Unfortunately, due to the great damage to the fresco in Matice, the council below which Climacus is portrayed cannot be exactly determined. However, in St. Sophia, the scene of the Sixth Ecumenical Council is clearly recognizable above his portrayal and can be also used in support of his identification. This council, also called the Third Council of Constantinople, was held in 680, and it officially condemned the monotheistic teaching about the nature of Christ. During his life, John Climacus advocated the idea of the duality of Christian nature, and his significant work, The Ladder of Divine Ascent, was written at a time when there was intense discussion on this topic that preceded the Sixth Concile. Thus, his placement directly below the fresco of the Sixth Concile on the north side of the vault of the narthex in St. Sophia can be related to his fight against monothelitism. Namely, as a fervent supporter of diathelism, Climacus was a contemporary to the emergence of the discussion about the doctrine of one will, even though this council was held 20 years after his death. What is more, this paper suggests that the text of the scroll displayed by the supposed John Climacus in St. Sophia does not deviate from Climacus' opinion and recommendation for the monks that he offers in his works, The Ladder of Divine Ascent. According to the epigram on the scroll, only by renouncing life can one experience a transformation that opens the way to the kingdom of heaven. The text is composed in such a way that it teaches, inspires, and acts instructively, and if a connection is established between the epigram and the presented holy monks on the second floor of the narthex, it can be understood as a message addressed to members of a monastic community. The content of his scroll might indicate a subtly planned iconographic program of the narthex where the theme of spiritual upliftment of monks is also included. Along with the depiction of John Climacus, the figures of 5 holy hymnographers are portrayed on the same northern half of the eastern wall of the St. Sophia narthex. In the absence of inscription with the names, as well as the irretrievably eroded texts written on the scrolls, held by the saints in their left hands, they have not been identified so far. The only exception is the figure of the far right end of this row, which was distinguishable as St. Theodore the Student, the famous abbot of Studios Monastery. He is presented in recognizable priestly attire, richly embellished with embroidery and pearls. Except for the second, the three other poets wear an oriental head wrap that falls on their shoulders, and are clad in monastic tunics and cloaks. In this rather compact group of saints, the figure presented in the middle stands out immediately because of its different gesture. Considering the iconographic features of this century figure, it can be suggested that this is a depiction of John Damascene, a famous poet, theologian, hymnographer, esteemed representative of the Masabas monastery in Palestine, and one of the greatest authors of canon dedicated to the Virgin. His face attracts the beholder's attention with its well-preserved physiognomy. He is dark-skinned with expressive cheekbones, slightly hooked nose, elongated almond-shaped eyes, and a semi-long white beard that descends in gentle ways towards his chest. His respectable central position among the poets could be determined from the data in his hagiography. That is, from the function at the court of the Caliph of Damascus, which was almost equal to the Caliph himself before becoming a monk. The identification of this figure of John Damascene is also supported by the depiction of his poetry, related to the composition of the Koimesis, which is situated on the blind dome above the narthex. In a fragment of the fresco of the first verse of the third song of the Damascene's canon, this prominent holy poet is portrayed with a raised hand indicating a musical temper to the girl singing and playing instruments. His portrait is smaller in size and quite well preserved, and is almost identical to the one in Matice, which is however here part of the composition of the Tree of Jesse. There is a clear resemblance to his presumed depiction in the row of standing figures on the east wall. Both figures not only share similar physiognomic features, but also wear the same light grey turban and light brown monastic cloak. However, the beard on the portrait in the blind dome has a noticeable wavy strand in the middle, a detail that can only be guessed at the depiction of the saints in the row of hymnographers. Our first visual encounter with John Damascene is in the famous Saqqara Parallela manuscript. As the author of this text, he was represented in it several times with or without a cowl and with the beard of alias length. In later depiction, the iconography of an old man with a long split beard and a turban of his head became established. The depiction of John Damascene in St. Sophia bears the most similarity with his representation in the King's Church in Studenica, Staro Nagoričane, and especially in St. Nikita, where he exhibits an almost identical physiognomy, prominent facial features and a dark complexion, emaciated cheekbones, an elongated nose, and a semi-long, wavy, white beard that falls on his chest. There are grounds to identify another hymnographer in the row, the one who stands slightly turned towards the monk recognizable as John Damascene. Considering the fact that he is presented directly next to John Damascene, this hymnographer can be identified as Cosmo of Mayuma. According to hagiographic tradition, John Damascene and Cosmo of Mayuma were relatives and collaborators, so they are often shown together as in the Menologion of Basil II. In monumental painting, they are depicted opposite each other, for example, in where they flank the scene of the Domitian, but also in St. Nikita and the King's Church in Studenica. What is more, in Lagudera, the central figure flanked the Mandelion, and at Bojana, as part of the first layer of paintings, they flank the scene of crucifixion. Furthermore, they are represented next to each other in Nerezi, Sopocani and Staro Nagoričino. This can be explained by the fact that these two saints are represented together in liturgy as well. The two canons are sang at Orchos on the morning of the Kaimesis feast on the 15th of August and were performed alternately, not one after another. For instance, an art of the Cosmas canon is followed by an art from John's canon, and so on. The two remaining saints, the one standing between Theodore the Student and the supposed John Damascene, as well as the one standing as the far left, that's first in the row, are hard to identify for the time being. However, the arrangement of the hymnographers in the Church of St. Panteleimon in Nerezi might be helpful here. That is one of the most significant representatives of fresco painting in the Byzantine cultural sphere. In Nerezi, the holy poets appear in the same ways in St. Sophia as a compact five-member group in a row. Moreover, the depiction of the holy hymnographers in Staro Nagoričino could be useful as well, even though here a group of three holy poets is shown. Taking this in consideration, it would not be crossing the line to carefully suggest that on the north side of the east wall of St. Sophia narthex, the same standard group of holy poets is represented by analogy with Nerezi, starting from right to left. St. Theodore the Student, St. Theophanes Raptus, St. John Damascene, St. Cosmo of Mayuma, and St. Joseph the hymnographer. In St. Sophia, an opposing wall as a counterpart to the supposed figure of St. John Damascene is depicted the young prince and monk Joseph. Who is represented with with a richly decorated crown on his head and an open book in his hands. This relation is very symbolic and supports the assumption that the central figure of the eastern wall of this holy space is John Damascene himself. The Indian prince monk Joseph, the son of the pagan emperor Avenir, and his spiritual role model Balaam are the main characters of the literary work, which according to Byzantine tradition was attributed to John Damascene. The complex iconographic program of the St. Sophia narthex can be analyzed from several aspects. The positioning of the poets in St. Sophia on the east wall may indicate an ideological connection with the theme picture on the blind dome above the narthex, on which Damasone's second canon dedicated to the mission of the Mother God is illustrated. The depiction of this theme testified that this area was designed completely for the celebration of the Mother of God, and the holy poets painted on the east wall joined this celebration with the verses of the poetry, which were presumably written on their scrolls. The space of the second floor of the narthex can also be seen in the light of sophisticated design and confrontation of characters and their connection, which is exemplified by the relation between St. John Damascene and St. Joseph as counterparts. Moreover, the iconographic solution and program of the fresco in this holy space can also be analyzed as a reflection of the historical currents and turbulences of the 14th century, as well as the novelties and changes related to liturgical practice. There is a conceptual connection between the scene of David's repentance, the vision of St. Peter of Alexandria, the depiction of the ecumenical concils, and the row of holy monks in the zone of standing figures. Accordingly, the penetrating gaze of the angel in David's repentance as he draws his sword from its scabbard ready for execution, the scene of the vision of Peter of Alexandria, and all 7 ecumenical concils from the vault can also be interpreted as instilling fear of God's punishment and emphasize church authority. On the other hand, by attaching importance to the holy poets, the lyrical tone is emphasized and gives a special tone to this sacred space. The inclusion of St. John Damascene in the iconography of the canon illustration scene is not an iconographic novelty. However, the depiction of holy poets is a group of coordinated and synchronized movements reminiscent of the participation in the liturgy. It's perhaps the most representative example of the fact that the beauty, volume, rhythm, and harmoniously coordinated movements of the figures contributed to establishing a closer and more direct connection between the painted program and worship, and in comparison went a step beyond the contemporaries of that time. Thank you very much for your attention.
This applause is both for Jadranka and her very promising young MA student, Nikolina.
Sorry?
Again,
sorry?
applause. This applause is both for Jadranka and her very promising MA student, Nikolina.
I was on mute. Thank you for keeping the time. I'm sorry I interrupted you seconds before you finished your presentation, so sorry for that, and thank you. Are there any questions or comments? No? Again, if any should come up, then we can leave them for the end of this session. Irena appeared but didn't have any questions, so okay. Okay, we continue this mini art history block within our session with Professor Tatiana Filipovska from the Department of Art History at our faculty, the Faculty of Philosophy. Her presentation is on the topic Perspective Architecture Illusion in the Scenography of the Renaissance and Baroque Theatre. So there you are, okay. Again, please keep the time and the floor is yours. And could everyone please mute their microphone?
Thank you, Maria. Are you hearing me? It's okay. So good afternoon to all colleagues and friends. And I'm also honored to be a part of this anniversary conference, especially to be a participant in this interesting session. So you already mentioned the topic of my presentation. And that will be perspective architecture illusion in the scenography of the Renaissance and Baroque theater. So I will enlarge the scene. I'm trying, but just a minute.
I think it's okay. You just need to either click F5 or click the
Okay.
thing where it says
Okay.
slide only.
Okay. Then I will go this way. Okay.
I mean,
So,
we can see the slide, so it's okay already, but just to make it all slideshow.
yes, I'm trying to make a slideshow, but it's going wrong something with my computer. Okay. The theater performance is an art of a moment. The only way we can be informed about the look of the scenery is some kind of a record from the event. Speaking of the Renaissance and Baroque theater, it can be a drawing, a picture, or a written testimony which contains describing of the stage design. Also, painting, architecture, and theater have a long relationship during the history. The rebirth of interest in the classic times, which was typical for the Renaissance, bore heavily upon the theater. Although mystery plays were still given in the 15th century, Masaccio and Mantegna were discovering the perspective effects in their paintings, and scholars were studying Vitruvius's few pages on the Roman and Greek theater. It was a time when Plautus, Terence, and Seneca were revived. Popes and nobles gave place on platforms, in courtyards, and later in palaces. The discovery of perspective served not only the painters, but also the theater. From the 16th century to the 18th, scenery and playhouses grew larger and more elaborate until they achieved the dubious distinction of the Baroque. It was in the Renaissance.
Excuse me, I got signal from the organizers. You should click on, when you see the first thing, you should click from the beginning, click that one. Like the first iconic thing you see. My technological vocabulary is great. When like you have from beginning, from current slide, custom slideshow.
Yes. You mean?
I mean, if you go from the beginning, then you can get to a slide, to current slide.
Sorry,
yeah, go.
You mean the first one from the beginning?
Yeah, that's right. I got a message from the organizer, so just click on the first one.
Oh,
let's see.
Okay, now.
Let's see.
Yes,
and now just try and get to the current one.
I used to show the other way, but it wasn't impossible on Zoom platform. It's okay, thank you.
Okay, so just get to.
Yes, now it's okay.
Slide that you need that.
Yes, this one. I need this one in the moment. It was in the Renaissance that for the first time the sense of space and form was expressed in the stage settings. We are not sure whether Laurana's panel was painted for a special performance. Often canvases from famous painters were used just to adorn the stage. Thus, in the castle of the Gonzagas in Mantua, two comedies of Plautus, the brothers, and the Carthaginian had as parts of the same setting Andrea Mantegna's cycle of 9 paintings, The Triumph of Caesar. These paintings, adorning the long side walls, were seen through arches placed in front of them to deepen the perspective. The new technique of perspective became more effective when the stage was moved from the long side of the hall to the narrow one. This erased the last remains of the medieval multiplacet. The new stage was narrow but quite deep, which was of vital importance since it made perspective more convincing. Leonardo da Vinci's example shows that the greatest artists were eager to show their mastery in this new field. The Renaissance brought changes that called for consistent, exact methods of representing objects in space, so that the Florentines invented mathematical perspective in the early 1400s to create a new tool needed for the same purpose. Brunelleschi, to whom we attribute the earlier examples of linear perspective, still worked mostly from models in his architectural practice. This transition between perspectivus naturalis and perspectivus artificialis constituted the first step toward a greater rationalization of the visual image and the detachment from medieval tradition. During the Renaissance, architecture came to be understood as a liberal art, and architectural ideas were thereby increasingly conceived as geometrical lineamenti, as bidimensional orthogonal projections. A gradual and complex transition from the classical theory of vision to a new mathematical and geometrical rationalization of the image was taking place. During the Renaissance and Baroque, most architects designed stage sets as well as buildings. The main difference between two activities was in their approach towards. As stage designers, they showed freedom and fantasy, freed from weight, stability, and solid. The modern architect's distinction of plan, elevation, and perspective rendering may have been invented in ancient Greece, since these are called by Greek names in the oldest extant description of architectural drawing. Shortly before Christ, the Roman engineer Vitruvius defined today's main types of architectural drawing in older Greek terms. Perspective rendering shows a facade with the sides withdrawn into a background, the lines all meeting in the center of a cycle. Since Vitruvius calls this a scenographia, and elsewhere mentions lost Greek treatises on perspective scenery, the Greeks must have had an unsystematic intuition on a single vanishing point when they painted palace facades on the tent called skene, or wood and canvas. Architectural drawing was not again to dominate stage scenery until Renaissance Italy accepted the text of Vitruvius as the 10 Commandments on architecture. Following Vitruvius's instructions on classic architecture, Andrea Palladio in 1580 started the erection of Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza as a kind of reproduction of a Roman playhouse. He projected step auditorium with semi-elliptical shape for providing a good sight. Vincenzo Scamozzi finished the theater in 1884, adding diminished perspectives of streets behind the 3 archways at the back of the stage and the 2 of the sides. There was no systematization in 15th century perspective treatises. Vitruvius found his biggest interpreter in Sebastiano Serlio, who in his famous Trattato su Architettura Scenica illustrated 3 standard settings for 3 basic types of plays. The so-called comic scene represents a public square surrounded with various kinds of houses suitable for ordinary citizens. This tragic scene is composed of luxurious palaces and temples for the great lords. Scena Satirica is composed by a landscape with rustic objects. The artist who served the court theaters used ancient way of scene-changing device, peraktoi, actually a system of prisms used for that purpose. Swinging the sides of prisms during the mythological and allegorical interludes between the acts of the play prepares a new stage design. Tables in the back, called prospettiva, were split in the middle and slide to the sides for changes of scene. Next, Italians developed angular flats or wings, like two sides of periactoi spread out to 120 degrees angle and arranged these in nests of 3 or more. At last, during the 17th century, periactoi were reduced to a simple oblong flats that could be drawn off stage to expose new flats and change the scene. The splendor of the Baroque stage design owed much to the excellent artist Giacomo Torelli, the first professional stage designer. In the period of flourishing of the opera scene in Italy, especially in Venice, he used a new method of changing scenery by mounting flat wings on the carrots. These were wheeled vehicles in the basement of the wings so that they can move through slots in the stage floor and carry the wings off and on stage. The example shows many wings on each side representing colonnades. The architecturally painted background is no longer one cloth but two, the second seen through opening in the first. Filippo Juvara followed Torelli in the use of this unit set with permanent arches on the sides and toward the back, and the backdrop that was changed to indicate the new location. But before the scenic designer could make full use of movable scenery, he had to solve a few special problems of perspective, as well as for avoiding the static symmetry of flats. Some suggestions for solving these problems were published in 1700 in the second part of the Jesuit Andrea Pozzo's book on perspective, the theater, for theater and church decorations. The Baroque was a supreme age of illusion. Architects seemed ready to accept the method al angolo of Fernando Gali Bibbiena, one where there was no longer a privileged point of view and the permanent tectonic reality of the aircraft. Architectural sceneries were running diagonally off stage toward undetermined distances, revolutionized and dominated scenic design for most of the 18th century. Several notable architects and scenographers of the Italian family Bibbiena became famous all over Europe. Francesco Galli Bibbiena's drawings from the late 17th century production show that the painted flats and backings are no longer parallel to the footlights. Two diagonal walls meet toward the rear of the stage, and through the great arch at the right, the audience can see a backdrop that is also hung at the angle. Sometimes he used a kind of divergent perspective, with walls leading backward and away from a common point. Another example with diagram and actual plan of the stage, which starts from the Raccolta da Fernando Galli di Vienna, a very important volume that was composed for the young students of architecture. And actually, in the 18th century, artists, scientists, and philosophers started losing their interest in perspective. The process of geometrization that had started with the inception of modern science was arrested by the focus of empirical knowledge spurred by Newton's work and the identification of inherent limitations in Euclidean geometry. Still, while the Bebianas invaded the court theaters in Austria and Germany, native artists turned their hands to stage design. Italians or their pupils dominated the theaters all over Europe, especially France and Spain. But the century of enlightenment was no more focused on grandiose architectonic scenes of aristocratic theater. Democratization of the theater as an institution reflected its repertory, now more concentrated on everyday life. Under the influence of Netherlands painting, Italian, even more Venetian stage designers like Canaletto started to paint city landscape, vedutas, using their experience in the perspective and stagecraft. The new tendencies and interests of the modern painting and further the painting and architecture of the 20th century meant an ending of a long era in which the perspective illusion as a crucial element of the theatric scene had a great importance. Thank you for your attention.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for your presentation and for keeping the time. I didn't have to interrupt you. Thank you. So now
I wasn't too long. I hope I wasn't.
No, it wasn't. That's what I'm saying. It was good.
Okay.
So Professor Ramadan Husein excused himself. He said he had previous engagements at 6:10, and since it's already 6 and we're running behind, I said, of course, I said it was quite okay. Best greetings to everyone. And now we continue with, we've ended with this art historic block, and we move to a topic which is very close to my heart, not particularly Portugal, but the classics in the 21st century. We go on with Professor André Simões from the University of Lisbon, from the Classics Department, with his presentation on mainstreaming classics in 21st century Portugal. So please, Professor, I can't, let me see. Yeah, yes, okay.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, please try and keep to the around 20 minutes and please continue.
Yeah, 15 minutes at most. Well, I would like to thank you for this invitation. I feel very honored to be here. And also, I would like to say I regret not being there because I love so much your country, and I can't wait to go there again. So when it comes to reading habits, Portugal ranks consistently below most EU countries, often quite below. Bookselling is by no means a profitable business here, and most small bookshops struggle to survive in a market dominated by big companies like the French Fnac or the Portuguese Bertrand. The latter, however, is a fine example or a fine exception of an unexpected bookseller empire. It began in 1732 in Lisbon, being the oldest operating bookstore in the world. But instead of succumbing to the arrival of big companies, it became itself a large retail seller with dozens of bookstores in most cities. The Portuguese reader is not a sophisticated one either. A walk among the aisles of any big bookstore will reveal mostly national and international bestsellers. But if you are lucky, you might find there a Latin grammar. Yes, you heard it correctly, a Latin grammar. Or a bilingual anthology of ancient Greek poetry, or a fresh new Virgil translation. So, why is there a Latin grammar among our bestsellers? Latin has only about 60 students in secondary schools, and no more than maybe 300 in all Portuguese universities each year. But this new and pricey Latin grammar sold more than 2,000 copies since it was published in March 2019. What about the bilingual Greek poetry book? Published last April, when the country was in full lockdown, it arrived in bookstores only in May, when most restrictions were lifted and bookstores could reopen. Since then, it already sold more than 1,000 copies in only 4 months. Do we have about 1,000 students of ancient Greek literature in our universities? Maybe 20 at most every year. I must remind you that we are only about 10 million with very poor reading habits. So these selling numbers are quite impressive. Portugal never had a strong tradition of translating classical Greek and Roman literature. When I was a young student of classical philology in the early 90s, I had to rely mostly on English, French, and Spanish translations. We had to wait until 2003 to have the first translation of the Odyssey in verse, 2003. The first modern translation of the Iliad came out in 2005. The first academic translation of the Aeneid was only published last June. These are no modest works, but the foundations of Western culture. Of course, there were a few translations in the beginning of the 20th century, and even earlier, but they were outdated and out of print for decades. There are some reasons for this neglect. First, we are only a few, and for cultural and political reasons, we do not have access to the vast Brazilian market. Second, we do not read much. And when the 1974 revolution put an end to 5 decades of fascist nightmare, we had outrageous illiteracy rates, over 25%. One of the first measures of the new democratic government was a massive alphabetization program. Third, during most of last century, culture was the privilege of a minority who could easily read in French, Spanish, and English, so there was no demand for Portuguese translations. Finally, there was, and there still is, a certain haughtiness among Portuguese scholars, the idea that you just do not need to read a Portuguese translation, or to have one, because you already can read English, French, Spanish, or German. I remember asking a professor of mine why there were no Portuguese translations of the Odyssey. She looked at me as if I were asking an utterly bizarre question, and all she said was, "Why can't you read English?" The notion of enriching our language and literature and outreaching to non-academic readers through quality translations was and still is strange to many a scholar in Portugal. If I bother you with these facts, it is because much of what I have to say today is already normal in many a country. But my country, one of the poorest in Europe, has a very serious problem with reading, and recent history might explain it. When the first modern translation of the Odyssey came out in 2003, however, it was much more than another academic translation. It became an immediate cultural phenomenon, and most surprisingly, a bestseller. Everybody was talking about it on TV, on newspapers, everywhere. The same happened 2 years later, when in the same publishing house came out a new translation of the Iliad. Let me be clear though, these unexpected bestsellers are just that, exceptional. Not all classics were created equal for the Portuguese reader. Many other translations have been published in the last 2 decades, but none had the same wide impact as Homer, the bilingual poetry, or even the Latin grammar. Apuleius, Catullus, Horace, Lucretius, Ovid, Petronius, just to mention a few, all had new translations in more than one publishing house. Still, they have interesting selling numbers, and publishing houses are interested in them. For instance, Virgil's Georgics and Eclogues had a new translation published last November by my friend Gabriel Silva from our Center for Classical Studies. Both books were presented at a well-known bookshop by a Latin literature expert, but also by a popular comedian and radio host with no connection to the traditional academic world. So why this sudden change at the beginning of the century? Why are radio hosts presenting Virgil? And why are Latin grammars and Homer bestsellers? I think it has to do with how the classics have been presented in the last 2 decades. In 2002, my dear friend Frederico Lourenço published his first and acclaimed novel. It was the first openly LGBTQ+ themed book in contemporary Portuguese literature to become mainstream and to win one of our most important literary prizes. So, when 1 year later, Lourenço published his new Odyssey, the verse translation I told you about, it was not just another academic self-centered and obscure publication. It was an exquisite hardcover edition in a literary but contemporary and beautiful Portuguese by someone everybody already knew, not as an academic, but as a novelist and unconventional one. And it was issued by one of our most respected publishing houses and marketed not as an academic work, but as a book for everybody who likes literature. And it was a bestseller. 2 years later, Lourenço published his new translation of the Iliad, and I dare say it was even a bigger success. Those 2 books became the first of a new collection by Cotovia Publishing House, featuring quality translations from the Greek and Roman classics by classical philologists from Lisbon and Coimbra universities. Lourenço went on to create some more editorial success, now in another publishing house. Among other works, such as the revised editions of the Odyssey and the Iliad in February 2019, he published a new Latin grammar, the one I've been talking about. Also, both original versions and his adaptations of Homer entered the official list of readings in elementary and secondary schools, which is no small feature. During the March and April lockdown, because of the pandemics, he started teaching Latin and Greek in Facebook by creating 2 very successful pages. You can see them here. 11,000 people liked it. It's really impressive, I think. Does this mean that all those who bought the Homeric translations read it? Or any other of the many new translations by other academics published in the last 20 years? Unfortunately, I believe they did not. Most just bought it because everyone was talking about it. Maybe most just read a few pages and then moved on. And that is not as bad as it sounds. At least some classics are becoming mainstream. They are being shelved in personal libraries, just like other unread literary icons like Joyce's or Tolstoy's masterpieces. But does this mean classics are just a fad among Portuguese readers, not at all. In the last few years, classics have become popular, and I suspect Lourenço's translations and mediatic exposure had an important role. But outreaching activities led by my Center for Classical Studies and other centers and non-academic associations are perhaps the key for maintaining the flame. This interest people from all sort of background have been having for classics. As I said last February, my center is especially interested in dealing with children and teenagers, both in elementary and secondary schools. But outreaching to adults is also a key part in mainstreaming the classics, mainly by conferences and short-term courses. I have been particularly interested in this kind of approach, and each time I am surprised by how adults are eager for classical related content. For the past years, I've been giving lectures about classical literature in my hometown public library, organized by a cultural association I belong to, in collaboration with the Center for Classical Studies of Lisbon. The first edition was in 2016, and it continued through 2017, comprising 8 lectures covering from Homer to Petronius. The second edition happened in 2018 with 6 lectures on Horace, Lucian, and others. In both editions, all lectures were at the public library on Saturday, and all were packed with retired people, doctors, secondary school teachers, unemployed, commerce workers, lawyers, etc. Accordingly, I do not present Euripides or Petronius the same way I do in my university classes, of course. This is no academic audience. I know this might sound obvious to you, but unfortunately it is not for most academics when addressing to non-academic audiences. In 2019, I was asked to give a Latin language course, and so I did. In 7 sessions, I presented the basics of Latin to more than 30 people from all kinds of background, including the Secretary of Culture from our town council. 2 of these sessions were field trips to the local museum and to a medieval monastery to read and talk about Roman inscriptions, local Roman inscriptions like the one you are seeing, and also Latin in Christian art and literature. So there's a demand for classical related content in our societies, and that should not be unexpected. After all, modern pop culture is full of classical references. I mean, isn't Harry Potter full of classical mythology with characters with Latin and Greek names? Aren't fantasy series, the likes of The Hunger Games, based on Roman and Greek iconography, culture, and again, personal names? Aren't our TV series based on a narrative structure that dates back to the Greek novels and comedies? Aren't so many blockbusters full of classical references, albeit discreet, sometimes even in their names? Aren't our shops full of products with Greek and Roman names? Ordinary people do want to learn about classics, and when we present classics not as exclusive, elevated, purely academic, distant masterpieces, but as the fascinating literary and cultural foundations of our Western culture, people pour into our classes and pack our conferences, and especially they ask for more. And that's all. Thank you. Lagodaram.
Thank you very much for this inspirational lecture. Many of the things I did not expect. About many of the things I got happy, especially the way how Latin is proliferating more and more now. So that is very refreshing and hopeful for the future. Let's see. Have we got any questions or comments now? Let me check Q&A. No, and no one in the chat. Anyone from the panelists? Yeah, please go on.
So it is not actually a question or remark. It is information that I want to share with all of you about the classical languages. I mean, as colleague Andres Simon said that Portugal has 10 million inhabitants, also in Greece. There are also 10 million. When I was in Athens 2 years ago, in the preparation meeting for the forthcoming International Byzantine Congress to be held in Istanbul next year, I was astonished that my colleagues in Greece said to me that they are about to abandon learning Latin in the secondary schools. So, as colleague Andres said, that there are nearly 20 students of classical Greek language in Portugal. Probably in Greece, in the near future, it will be 0 or so. Even in our faculty, we have the whole Institute of Classical Studies 4 years term. So we have less and less candidates that they are involving in it, especially in the last several years. So this was the information about Greece. I was really surprised.
Yeah, thank you. But it's a problem, and we face the same problem until the beginning of the century. But I don't know if you were in Skopje in February. I presented some numbers because here something is happening, because in the last, I don't know, 5 years, 5, 6, 7 years perhaps, our classical philology graduation is full of students. So I don't know what's happening, and I hope it continues. And also our classes, for instance, I give a class about daily life in Greece and Rome. It's an optional subject. I mean, it's not mandatory, but I always have at least 60 students, 60 students.
Yeah.
Something is happening. I hope.
It's maybe up to you, not about the subject.
I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have daily life of ancient civilizations as well, and students do love it. Thank you. Now I think I give the floor to myself very humbly. Sorry for that. I come from the Institute for Philosophy, from the Faculty of Philosophy in Skopje, and I forgot what my title was. Okay, and the title of my presentation is The Persistence of the Sacred in a Profanized Society, although I mainly talk about reality than society, but this is to be seen. So the sacred is, just a second, this whole screen and reading proves more difficult than I thought, excuse me. Okay, so the sacred is believed to be ontologically and axiologically superior to the profane, which is the non-sacred, the quotidian, the ordinary, in primordial religions and in the religious life of today. And in an archaic setting, the need for self-determination and the affirmation of the sense of belonging to a group, its identity, its values, its customs, is fulfilled through the sacred, through intense social cohesion within the religious cult and the community. The community confirms itself, therefore establishing its role in the world, survive, keep safe, persist, succeed. The primordial belief in the sacred is essential to the way of life. It structures reality, it gives directions, it orders time and space, and it governs relations. So the sacred reality, when believed to be infinitely more important than the profane, exhibits performative powers in establishing ways and patterns of subsequent beliefs and behaviors. This means that custom law, interpersonal relations, held practices, law, art, and proto-metaphysics are all in some direct or mediated way founded upon and established in virtue of the sacred. The sacred and the profane share a relation of double mutual dependence, which is the basis not only of religious belief, but the entire structure of the expression of belief, the religious cult, and the connections and practices which stem from it. The sacred is powerful but fragile. While it renders the profane possible, safe, and ordered, it is susceptible to corruption, to impurity, to desacralization. The profane is ontologically inferior, which means that it is dependent on the ineffable power of the sacred reality. It cannot sustain itself. However, while the profane realm does not sustain itself, if no sacred foundation, persistence, and intervention is constantly involved, it is responsible for the sacred. So the profane reality, ordinary, unexceptional, weak, dull even, lends itself to the sacred, preventing it from severely declining. The profane reality ceases to be when it gives rise to the tools necessary for the proper functioning of the religious cult. The sacred, susceptible to the corruption, as I said, of the unholy and impure, is protected within this belief and the practices of the cult. And since the community is organized around the strength and meaning of the sacred, even if in its least religious aspects, seemingly removed from it, it is indirectly connected to it. The need for the sacred to be safe and protected so that it can keep the profane safe and nicely ordered is expressed through the sets of prohibitions of the negative cult and through the constant dedicated engagement by the believers to keep the sacred reactualized, intense, refreshed, and powerful. These are the crucial elements of the fruitful functioning of this basic dichotomy. However, the belief in the sacred includes the belief in its decline through the passage of profane time. Most of the primordial religious cult is dedicated to the partial reactualization of the initial sacredness of the world, and most of the contemporary religious behaviors follow this need. The intensity of the sacred in the world has subsided through time, and the modern way of life lacks the constant fascination by some superior reality. This decline is also staved off in the contemporary context of self-deliberation. But so thanks to different ways of displaying religiousness and communicating faith in the postmodern, or the modern or the postmodern world, but it's still difficult. So the belief in the sacred perseveres, transformed, adapted, and incorporated in the contemporary societal and emotional and aesthetical and ritual needs and ways of expression. My point is, for those willing to seek out meaning, wonder, and awe, the sacred is there. Homo religiosus is a descendant of his sacred ancestors. He believes that the sacred can be exteriorized through any person, event, object, or phenomenon. The original time of profound sacredness can be at least partially and briefly brought back, so that the superior reality, transposed in the now of the sacred time in the cult, can ensure the continued preservation and safety of the world. But this homospeciation seems somewhat anachronistic in the contemporary world. While many advantages of the loosening of the constraints of organized or even compulsory religion are obvious, like the possibility for genuine, authentic faith, obvious, untainted by the pressure of pious appearances, or the deeply personal, completely intimate and unmediated connection to God, this insistence on autonomy, on self-deliberation, resonates as a disadvantage of the secular age. While liberating, the lack of referral to higher instances to regulate social and interpersonal relations and personal decisions can be troubling. Any such yearning for a deferred responsibility can be seen as escapism in the secular age, which exhibits a permeating distrust for the need to commune with the sacred or the need for the divine in general. The power of humanity is sufficient to keep a world that is a true cosmos and not chaos, that is known and illuminated, and not a mess of wildly under-researched ineffability. So Kant's insistence on sapere aude means that immaturity, a result of ignorance, but not of ignorance, but of the lack of courage for autonomous use of reason and wisdom, can be overcome. The enlightened man needs no authorities. He is capable of self-determination. Since freedom has always come with the burden of responsibility and the abundance of options with the confusion of choice, it is no surprise that life is complex and filled with anguish. Of course, this does not mean that spiritual endeavors and religious feelings are non-existent or repressed by some external disapproving authority. For Taylor, the explosion of religious lives, this radical proliferation of religiosities and spiritualities, is a main attribute of the modern age. The sources of the experience of the sacred are much more difficult to find compared to the past when they were constantly around, although not easily accessible. The objects of religious sentiments and cultic behavior are not connected to the very existence of the community anymore, like it used to be at the beginning. It is hardly true that the contemporary world lacks meaning, however. Meaning is meant to be discovered and created, and that is a very important point. The sacred in the world, as it was previously mentioned, is prone to declining. The beginning of philosophy meant that myths were slowly transformed from sacred tales into allegories, didactic stories, from a sacred narration of the beginning and the sacred ancestors into fun little anecdotes about imaginary creatures. The rituals slowly changed from cultic sacred activities to profane repetitive actions, like customs or habits. According to Eliade, when the feeling of the need for religiosity towards the cosmos fades, the perspective of the participation into sacredness and into infinity, and the idea of the responsibility for the continual safety of the world completely changes. And this is important. The primordial man is completely responsible for the entire world. So this development of the communities outside of the necessity of sacred dedication means that deities stop being accessible through the participation in the cosmic rhythm. The cyclic time becomes frightening when it is desacralized, when it stops being a way to reintegrate the primordial situation. And with this, for the reactualization of the mysterious presence of the divine. This is Eliade. The sacred, however, persists. Myths do not simply disappear, but transformed into allegories, fables, stories, novels, comic books, television series, desacralized, but are still here. Rituals persist as well, transformed into contemporary forms of initiations, remembrances, celebrations adjusted to the conditions of the world today. Certain traces of the nostalgia for the origin, for the beginning, typical for the primordial religiosity and the lengthy period of the human connection with the sacred, as well as the desire for ritual recreation of the world in the cultic actions, are quite visible in all repetitive celebrations today. Even drunken New Year's celebrations, of course. The repetitive sacred dedication is present in other group activities as well, like jubilees, also in the arts and sports, so they're still there. A large portion of the ways and forms in which the sacred manages to survive and thrive is due to this amalgamation of Christianity and the pagan mythical characters and events into customs and narratives we still have today, further desacralized. So very, very simply put, this reconciliation of characters and events is quite obvious in persons like Saint Elijah, or the god of thunder and lightning, or Saint George, or the dragon slayer, Saint Nicholas, or the traveler, the seafarer, the messenger, etc. The sacred in Christianity multiplied, like in primordial context, but not only persons are sacred, but also their symbols, the things they represent, like portraits on icons, frescoes, sculpture. Their remnants are believed to have special powers. Sacred are the places in which sacred persons moved and worked. The need for veneration, for a connection to a reality beyond what is known, the need for assimilation by an ontologically, axiologically superior reality, the need for hope and comfort remain. The cult of the saints is the cult of the sacred ancestors or lesser deities. The cult of the heroes is the cult of the gods on a lower level of adulation. Mythical characters serve, and still continue to do so, as an inspiration for the art, especially during the Renaissance. And further on, the opinions and stances of these authors, which refer to myths and mythology, could not significantly differ from the primary mythological sense, since the mythological themes and meanings could not be truly separated from their form, because they go together. In this sense, Meletinsky proposed that in the boundaries of the traditional stories, some non-traditional literary forms with enormous generalizing force were created. These forms would determine not only the social characters of their time, but some of the basic human ways of behavior through characters like Hamlet, Don Quixote, Don Juan, Misanthrope, and so on, so-called eternal characters, which became special pattern, similar to the mythological patterns or paradigms, and serving for future literature, for future reference. The perspective of sacred things, those that pulsate with this external unknowable power, which exteriorize inexplicable strength, if the belief that any manifestation of the sacred is an exteriorization of power or might, things that cause the best and most plentiful source of meaning gradually decline with the progress of the Enlightenment. The authors Dreyfus and Kelly remark that the discovery of sense through feelings of fascination by a superior power is not completely lost. They claim that through the reading and study of Western classics, for example, one can discover crucial moments which pulsate with almost divine, sacred, and powerful presence. The work of art embodies the truth of his world, as they put it. Dreyfus and Kelly proposed that artworks shine, thus illuminating the way of life, and that all other things are illuminating by their brightness. People need the feelings of the sublime, the fascination of an alien, powerful reality, being moved by something extraordinary, being rendered speechless by beauty, goodness, honor, pride, the sense of shared exaltation, and similar sentiments of enchantment. And very briefly, because this is a completely different topic, although it is connected with the ways in which the sacred manages to stay among us, is the idea of the ritual theory connected to play. And my idea here is that the ritual nature of games is another way of the persistence of the sacred. Well, Huizinga's seminal work of ludology, Homo ludens, and yes, I know that Huizinga's name is not pronounced that way, but I just cannot pronounce the Dutch way. His work remains unchallenged, but not much has been done to develop the study of the links between the possible role of play in the origin and the history of ritual practices. And also the connection between play and ritual is contentious because on the one hand, there is an evident difference between play and ritual. They seem to be disparate phenomena, one unburdened, flexible and free, and the other exhibiting formality and rigidity. But on the other hand, the hierarchization and rules of games, often based on repetition and unexpected outcomes or consequences, and the fact that they open a space-time bubble within reality, something which the sacred does, make them quite similar and obviously closely related to ritual. So rituals can therefore be considered as if, and in essence, pretend play. So the fact that man is capable of playing with different options and perspectives and scenarios, again, makes him obviously capable of being ritually active and engaged. So some authors like Kiowa includes himself in the pioneers of this identification of the sacred and play, but claims that he differs from Huizinga in one key point, which is 2 key points. While for the former, anything can be reduced or can find its roots in play. So myth and ritual and culture and symbols and law and literature and arts in general, so everything. For Kiowa, he does not believe that the forms of play and the cult, by making sure to separate themselves from the regular order of existence, would work as well. He doesn't think that they should assume equal positions. So he does not assume Huizinga's position. For some other authors like Fink, by being cultic at the beginning, play was installed right at the center of attention of the archaic man. So within the cult, ordinary things are elevated to the sublime, powerful positions. Man constantly lives in the world, but due to his priorities, he has no real relation with the world. He's in the world, but not with the world. This connection is established on the level beyond the profane, as contradictory as it sounds, through the free nature of play and through the ludic nature of the cult. So I would conclude here just by mentioning that the idea of Dreyfus and Kelly, that some things illuminate other things, they make things shine, is always visible to me during events like this one, when people get together and share ideas, and it's almost palpable how both intellectual happiness and the promise for further collaboration are really inspiring. When you find your kindred spirits in a way. So this all things shining, this idea that things that shine make other things shine, is always visible during events like this one, for which I'm thankful to all of you and all the other participants in this conference as well. I would finish here, so thank you. I take the floor from myself now. Are there any questions or comments? Let me check chat and everything. Or maybe questions and comments from the panelists. No? Okay. If there aren't for this presentation, are there any other residual comments or questions from before? Or something that you thought of now, maybe? Please, if there are. We're already almost an hour outside the agenda, so it's fine. We won't stay here until next Thursday, I promise, but we don't have to panic, is my point. I had a question for Professor Angelaccio about the project that you mentioned with our university. Where will it, like, how do you intend to, what is the main point in which the project will develop? I didn't know about much of it. I don't know why, or maybe I have forgotten. Where does it go in the project?
No, it's just a touristic, slow tourism management project, because we have agreed with your research group to put together experience coming from Italy and in some sense an European region, like with a touristic process of a certain type, with another Balkan European region, by taking advantage from a classic idea to recover Via Ignazia, until Via Ignazia. And the interest is to try to develop a strategy to put together. We are studying, we have developed several techniques from a digital point of view, but also from management point of view for slow tourism. And there is the interest to put together with your experience, because you have a lot of material, but the need to put in a touristic setting.
Yeah, there is material, there is no management. So. Thank you. Anyone else?
In some sense, this is the European Commission has indicated this direction of financing, and so we have followed this direction. But unfortunately, it is just an initial step. So I think that must be put together competence also from academic point of view. And so
well, I wish you success.
Okay, thank you for your words. Thank you.
Anyone else, please? Questions or comments or final remarks, maybe? Maybe someone has a final remark. I feel like I'm on an auction, like going once, going twice, and now I'm closing.
Yes, a lot of.
Yeah. Okay. So if there are no other questions or comments, I thank everyone again for their participation, these inspirational and illuminating lectures. And I hope your papers will find some happy readers when the collection of papers comes out. And I hope that we can find ways to collaborate in the future as well. And maybe see each other in some conference or some symposium, but also other modalities as well. So thank you everyone again, and best from me. And since the organizers have not messaged me or told me anything else, I think it is up to me to finish this session, which I very unceremoniously do by just clicking leave, I think. So I'm leaving you on that note.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Ah.